You can tell from the descriptions that this is something that the Jews in America have never really experienced. To see a Rebbe, to be like you're in the Rebbe's presence, the ruchnis of that was something. It was very, very powerful. And people would later chazir the Menorah, or they would chazir things over to their shuls or to the people that what the Frierdiker Rebbe said and which parts, and everybody would compete. Who understood what and how much did you understand?
I'm Yossi Kamen. Welcome to Among Chassidim by Derher, an ongoing farbrengen about life as a chassid, our vibrant connection with the Rebbe, and inspired living shaped by the way he teaches us each and every day. How are you today?
Baruch Hashem, thank you for having me.
Of course. It's when we started, I knew that you're going to be on. Baruch Hashem, you have done many very in-depth and very interesting articles that you have written for the Derher over many years, and they're still being featured monthly. And I felt that it would be very interesting to either talk about something that you wrote about in the past, and in this case, I think there's two topics that you are researching, which are going to be featured in future Derher magazines, which I think are very interesting topics. I guess we'll give a sneak preview, and in conversation, ultimately there's going to be more details than what is going to be in print. So I think this might be interesting. Specifically, the two topics that I want to talk to you about, and hopefully we'll have the time to discuss both of them. But number one is the article that you're working on, the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit to the United States. Not when he moved in Tafshin Aleph, but the visit. And the second topic that you're writing about, which is very, very interesting, is the shape of the Menorah in the Beis HaMikdash and everything that entails. So let's start with the visit of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Sounds like a plan?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
What you have in the printed article is never going to be the same in a conversation. People, sometimes people ask, they want hashmatis from whatever we didn't put in. The reality is usually the best hashmatis we put inside, because that's what makes it more interesting. If the story is more entertaining or interesting. But yeah, you're right. There's definitely things that don't go in an article, especially about the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit to America. It's a very, very unique story, and it's so large that it really deserves a book. The Frierdiker Rebbe was here for 10 or 11 months. This wasn't a visit like to visit Eretz Yisrael. The Frierdiker Rebbe went to Eretz Yisrael right beforehand in Tafrish Peites. It was about 12 days or 14 days, the entire visit. He was there for two Shabbosim, Shabbos Nachmu and Shabbos Chazayin, and we wrote about that, and that was something that we felt like he could put into an article. But sitting with the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit to America was just so immense. It was impossible to fit in everything. There were so many beautiful descriptions, so many amazing stories that Ein L'Davar Seif. I wrote on my status that I'm writing about it, and I asked, I told people if anyone has something interesting, they should send to me. I got so much stuff, and I almost didn't include any of it because the story itself. I mean, what people usually send is they found that the Frierdiker Rebbe was in their city of Shliach, and there was a news article about it, and there was a story here and a story there, and I met someone. But the story itself, as it was reported in the newspapers, as it's already been published in Chabad publications in Toldos Chabad B'Aretz Habris, the story is so extensive and so amazing that it was just never ending.
Okay, I'm very excited. Sounds like
I have to tell you the whole story. Yeah.
So where does it begin? What first of all, what's the context? So we're talking about it was Tafresh Peites, right?
Frierdiker Rebbe arrived here in the very end of Tafresh Peites.
Right, and he was here the whole, most of Tafresh Tzaddik.
Most of Tafresh Tzaddik.
So 1929, 1930. So he's coming from, I guess this is the next step after the podcast that we had a few episodes ago with David Margolin about the Beis Tammuz, about that whole story. And the Frierdiker Rebbe now has left Russia and has moved to Riga. And
right.
The trip is from Riga, right? That's
from Riga, yeah.
Okay,
The trip.
Take it away.
Yeah, the Frierdiker Rebbe leaves from Riga. I mean, he went to Eretz Yisrael first. From Eretz Yisrael, he went
What was the
straight to
purpose?
America.
What was the purpose of the trip?
So the purpose of the trip was the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe was now I would say pushed out of Russia, or however you would want to describe it. Till then, he was the Rebbe, he was the Nasi in Russia, and all the Russian Jews. I mean, if you just to jump back in the history a little bit, all the Rabbeim were basically the term Nasi Ader is a very physical gashmistic one when it comes to when you talk about Russia, the Yidden in Russia, all from the Alter Rebbe down. Every one of the Rabbeim was at the forefront of the gashmistic leadership, not even Ruchniist, simply gashmistic leadership of the Yidden in Russia, of taking care of them in every way. You have the Alter Rebbe started the stories of the Kolonias, and that was with the Mittel Rebbe too. We wrote articles about that, and the Tzemach Tzedek was the stories of the Kantonistin, and there Marash, you have the stories about the pogroms. There Rashab, you have a million different Askanis things that he did on behalf of the Yidden in Russia. And in general, in Russia, the understanding was that if you ask a Jew in Russia who is the leader of Russian Jewry, he would tell you the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And maybe the Misnagid also. In other words, if they were Chassidim and they were Misnagdim, so in the time of the Mittel Rebbe, you had the Mittel Rebbe and Rebbe Tzil of Volozhiner. Or you had, in the time of the Rebbe Rashab, there's Reb Chaim Mezer or Reb Chaim Brisker and the Rebbe Rashab. But they were always viewed as at the forefront. And this is actually, it's interesting, it's not the case of the other branches of Chabad. There was Kapos, there was Liadi, there was Niezhin, the other sons of the Tzemach Tzedek who became Rebbes in their own right. You don't see the same level of I don't know what the right word would be, but you don't see that same idea. The Rebbes in Kapos or Liadi, if you look in Beis Rebbe, the way he describes them, he says they said Chassidus and they were Mekabel B'Seir Panim Yafes and Chassidim who came to visit them, and that was the basic relationship. It was a Rebbe who says Chassidus, and he's Miyayitz and Chassidim who come, and that he's their Rebbe. But by the Rebbe Rashab, he writes on a whole different level how tut mit the Junge, and he's in the leadership, and so basically what you have at the end of by the Frierdiker Rebbe's times, there were many Rabbonim, many Rosh Yeshiva that simply, when it came communism, they just picked up and left. And they said, we can't be from here. It's clear that the Russians are trying to shut everything down. We're leaving. And anyone who could leave. And they sent all the Yeshiva Bachim over the border. And many famous names of people who did that. There was tons of Yiddishkeit. They were talking about the whole Belarus, the whole Ukraine. It was full of Rebbes and Chassidim and Misnagdim and Yeshivas and all sorts of stuff. And Lita, parts of Lita, yeah, I'm not sure. Lithuania wasn't part of the Soviet Union at the beginning. But there were portions of it that probably were. So you have all these people running away, and I've even heard from various historians a criticism: why didn't the Frierdiker Rebbe leave? Why? Because there's no future. If there's no future, if we know that the future is everyone's going to be underground, we'll just tell all the Chassidim to leave. But if you read a little bit about the history of where the Frierdiker Rebbe, of the background of where the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming from, to leave means to abandon your children. You don't, if the communists would tell you you could leave Russia, but you have to leave your babies behind. You don't leave your babies behind. And the Yidden of Russia, that was the cradle of Chabad Chassidus. I mean, the Yidden of Russia, not just the Chassidim who came and saw the Frierdiker Rebbe on a regular basis, all the Yidden of Russia were his children. So to pick up and leave is unthinkable. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is there.
I have to point out that I think most Yidden in the world at that point lived in the Russian Empire. Is
right, yes, I think so, yeah. By that time, America may already have been bigger. But it was definitely in Europe. It was the biggest.
There's a lashon from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says that the Reiv Minyan of Binyan of Yidden in Russia, right?
Right. Yes. There is such a letter. I don't know if at what point there was. I don't know if Rebbe was talking about then. No, you're right. It was Yud Thomas. Yeah, I think it's about that kufa. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is not leaving, but then the events of Yud Thomas happen, and at the end, the Frierdiker Rebbe is forced to leave. So, and he writes the letter on the train. There's a very beautiful letter where he writes. I don't remember if I remember the lashon by heart, but that no iron wall will chas v'shalom layafid tikvasi tamtzeini, that there won't be any shalayafid beinenu, the whatever the distance is, richa kamakim layafid beinenu chas v'shalom v'chas v'shalom. And the whole idea of being in Riga is that it's very close to Russia, and that he can still deal with Russian Jews and take care of them, and he's fundraising for them, and he's writing letters to them, and the Frierdiker Rebbe is not abandoning them in any way. It just the Mikeach HaMetzias, now he's stuck in Latvia. So that's where America comes in, because when the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, he's now what's Yiddishkeit in Europe? There's Poland, there's Hungary. There's Latvia. These are all places where Chabad is actually not very commonly well known.
Not dominant.
Not dominant at all. And many of them never even saw Mera Chabad Chassid. They never even heard of Chabad. Yeah.
I heard from Avram Flintal of Ashalom, Machutin, Crown Heights. Says his mother was from Lodz. They said my mother always used to say in Lodz we never heard of Lubavitch. Punk there was, I think Reb Zalman Schneerson was in Lodz, I believe, but there were
Right.
some Lubavitch. But
Right.
that was the idea. Like in Russia, everyone knows Lubavitch. In Poland, we never heard of Lubavitch
Yeah, yeah. It was just
until
this strange that there was a name. Like my own grandfather also grew up in a shtetl in Romania, Mendy Greenberg, and I don't think they didn't even hear of Chassidim. Forget about they were just simple Jews. They had never even the word Chabad for sure. They had never heard of. And it's interesting because I once found an old book about Russian Jewish history written in 1913. And it's like while Russian Jewish history is still happening, and the guy is writing the history, and he writes about the Hasidic movement of Baal Shem Tov and the different, and he says there's Rebbes in Hungary and there's Rebbes in Poland, and he describes them, as a historian might describe them, and then he says, but the Rebbes in Russia are different, and and there's three, there's the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek. He says the Alter Rebbe was very famous in his leadership. And then he says that his son was considered more mufshit. I forgot the words in English, and the grandson was again very, very dominant. Now it's actually, we know Chassidim Takas described this thing about the Mittler Rebbe that he never looked at the face of a coin, that he was mufshit from Gavshinius, but that didn't come as a stira to what he did for the Kolonius and everything. But that's how he describes it. And in other words, by him, as far as the Yiddishkeit in Russia, the Lubavitcher Rebbes are very, very present. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is now. Actually, on that note, so I just found a story about the Mittler Rebbe that it said that we wrote an article for Kislev about Reb Nachum, the Mittler Rebbe's oldest son, and he says that one of the stories that Chassidim write is that he used to go along with the Mittler Rebbe to various things, and there was once a meeting where the Mittler Rebbe there was a Yechidus, and two Gvirim came to the Mittler Rebbe for an arbitration or just for an eitzah on how to make a partnership work. And the Mittler Rebbe wasn't happy about the state of the Yer Shemaim of these two Gvirin. So he told them very straight that kinus l'sadikim yafalem yafal kinus l'rashaim aylahem va'aylam, and you want me to help in a kinus l'rashaim? He told them very sharp. And Rabbi Menachem was sitting next to the Mittler Rebbe, and he felt uncomfortable, and he decided that he's going to help the situation. So he started to tap his father's foot under the table to nudge him a little bit. And the Mittler Rebbe and the way the story is written is that he says the Mittler Rebbe was in ganz mufshel from Manyan Elam Hazeh, so he just said out loud, "Nachem kvach mir de fuss." Nachem's kicking me. But anyways, we're getting off topic. The Frierdiker Rebbe is now in Riga, but everything about him is about helping Russia. And the Yidden in Poland and in Latvia and in all these new places, they don't, and maybe Latvia is different, but Poland and Hungary, that's not their issue. That's not what they know about. It's the Frierdiker Rebbe is like a new person showing up. They hear that there's Jews in Russia that are suffering, and they're all willing to help, but they don't really. It's not their story. But America is very unique because all the Yidden in America, a vast majority of them were coming from the Russian Empire. So by then you have already millions upon millions of Jews who came from Russia. In the early years, it was not people that were very excited about their Yiddishkeit. The Rabbeim were very against people moving here, and most of them did it like if they asked, they didn't really get rishus. But regardless, there were tons and tons of Yidden, millions of Yidden living here. These were all Russians. Their parents were Russians, or they were Russians, or their grandparents were Russians. And you have a huge amount of Chassidim, of Einaklach of Chassidim. No, when they say that Tzemach Tzedek had 600,000 Chassidim, it didn't mean that 600,000 people were coming for Rosh Hashanah. It meant that the Chassidim who came to the Rebbe in those days were like the Klei Kodesh, the Rav of a city, the Sheikhet, the people who were really a little more in the know. But every Pashta Yid in the town that they lived in knew that there's a Rebbe, and they knew that the Rebbe would take care of them. And if they needed a bracha, they wrote to the Rebbe. And but they were still very simple Jews. That didn't change the situation. So they come now. So let's say their kids or grandkids come to America. They're Russians. They have an affinity for Russian Jewry, and also they have a very close relationship with Chabad. They know that the father, the grandfather, the great grandfather either went to the Rebbe or saw the Rebbe when the Rebbe came to visit them. And there's tons of Nusach Harishos in America. I believe there were. When the Frierdiker Rebbe was in jail and Agudas Chassidic Chabad was lobbying the American government to help the Frierdiker Rebbe, they wrote that there's 100 or 200 Nusach Harishos, and on behalf of 200,000 followers. The Frierdiker Rebbe has 200,000 Chassidim in America. That wasn't a lie. That wasn't an exaggeration. There were 200,000 people belonging to Nusach Harishos. Maybe it was a slight exaggeration, as you can expect, but there were many hundreds of thousands of Jews that belonged to Nusach Harishos and that had a history with the shaykhs to Chabad. So it's only natural for the Frierdiker Rebbe to say, okay, so now if we're working to help the Russian Jews, where are you going to fundraise for them? Where are you going to raise awareness for them? It's going to be in America. And that's why it looks like that's why it seems that he chose to come to America right then.
So the stop to Eretz Yisrael on the way is, I mean, I know the Rebbe explained it once, right? The Rebbe said that all of the Rabbeim never went to Eretz Yisrael, period. And the Rebbe said, and this, that Frierdiker Rebbe went to Eretz Yisrael is because he didn't have access to the Eilim of the Rabbeim, because he couldn't be in Russia. So he went to Eretz Yisrael to the Mekemes HaKadoshim instead. So is that the reason? Is that the only reason that we know?
Yeah. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that too. The Frierdiker Rebbe also said that he's going to the oil. It's clear in the Frierdiker Rebbe's writings. Obviously, with the Frierdiker Rebbe traveled a lot, and the Frierdiker Rebbe went to see Chassidim everywhere. So when he goes to Eretz Yisrael, he's going to see the Chassidim there. And in America also, he's obviously coming to visit the Chassidim in America. That's obviously a big part of it. But I don't know if that would be the central reason. Now that was the official reason when the Frierdiker Rebbe announced that he's coming to America. It's on behalf of Russian Jewry, to raise awareness for Russian Jewry, to raise funds for Russian Jewry. But there was also the aspect that the Frierdiker Rebbe was not looking to settle in Riga. Even the stationery says Riga, Latvia is Zmani, temporary. The Frierdiker Rebbe always wrote that he was living there only temporarily. So he was looking where's going to be the next place for Chabad headquarters. And Lapayala was Poland, but we know that he was looking in America.
There's a svara that the Frierdiker Rebbe would stay.
Not only a svara, it's not only a svara. It's clear, it's obvious, and it's documented. And even in the articles themselves that describe the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit, so first of all, they say that it's on behalf of Russian Jewry. Then also, a lot of times you see that the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to see the state of American Jewry. That's what like Rashag explains it to one reporter. He wants to see what's going on in America because the Frierdiker Rebbe Taka started working. I mean, America in those days was a world away. But even the Rebbe Rashab in the last final years, he told the Frierdiker Rebbe, he told Shmuel Levittin, I think, would say that he heard from the Rebbe Rashab that we have to start looking at America. And
there were certain Chassidim from the Rebbe Rashab, but the Rebbe Rashab told him to move to America, like Saul Jacobson, right? There's, I think, a few people like that.
They moved in the time of the Frierdiker Rebbe. I think we wrote in the Derher that Rabbi Elia Axelrod seems to be the first person that moved to America with the permission of the Frierdiker Rebbe, of any of the Rebbeim. There were people who came before. There was a chassid, his name was Reb David Shifrin, who was the center of all Chabad and Yanim in America, but he didn't ask permission before he went. He went, and he told the Rebbe Rashab that he's going, and then he did a lot of work on behalf of the Rebbeim in America. Before him, there was also Reb Avram Chaim Rosenbaum. There's a very interesting book, Tildas Avram Chaim. He came to America too. He came because he was running away from the Russian police. They were trying to arrest him. He had already sat in jail for helping Bachram evade the draft. So he came to America. Even before him, there was Rabbi Vidrovitz. I forgot his first name, but he was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. He was one of the editors of the Shut Tzemach Tzedek when it came to print. He was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. He was the Rav of Moscow, and then at some point the Russians kicked all the Jews out of Moscow, so he came to America. And he's the first known serious chassid of that caliber that lived in America. But that was all very, very small and very, very little.
There were some more also.
Later there was, So now by the time the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming, once World War I broke out, many from people came, many Chassidim came too. And after the Russian Revolution, there was even more. So by the time the Frierdiker Rebbe is writing is coming to America, there's a very decent group. There's Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson. There was Elia Simpson, I think, lived here. There was a whole long list. Actually.
We just wrote about the Frierdiker Rebbe's Malamed that lived in Worcester. We just wrote about that.
Right. Yeah, Meisha Binyamin the Malamed, I think. And there were many other Chassidim, but even Tmimim of people like so. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Malamed is not someone that we know as part of. I don't know if he has Inakach and Lubavitch today, but even from like the Lubavitch that we know, the families that are here, there are already many that came. There was Yechanan Gordon came very early. Elia Simpson, Yisrael Jacobson. And there was a whole long list.
Shalom Posner also came early-ish.
Shalom Posner came, he was in Eretz Yisrael when the Frierdiker Rebbe visited Eretz Yisrael, and I think he was doing bricklaying, and the Frierdiker Rebbe told him not to stay in Eretz Yisrael and to move to America and to go on Shlichus in America. So he came right then. I believe he came very quickly, right while the Frierdiker was in America. I think that's when they moved, but I could be mistaken. So, but one of the reasons, so the Frierdiker Rebbe says that it's a time to look into American Jewry, and that was something the Frierdiker Rebbe already did years before. The Avram Axelrod's father his name was Shlomo Aaron Axelrod. He was living in Marietta, Ohio, in a little town here, and the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to him that there's 50 states, and every one of those 50 states must have shuls and yidden and nusach shuls. And he says it's only a question of the tamula, of connecting with all the people in 50 states and making meistis in all 50 states, and there should be shiur chassidus, and there should be chinuch al taras hakodesh. And the Frierdiker Rebbe basically tells him we have to have shluchim in all 50 states. In Tafresh Pei Beis or Pei Gimel or Pei Daled, that's when the Frierdiker Rebbe writes this to them. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was already doing these inyanim. But when he comes to America, it's to look into the state of American Jewry. The part that they weren't saying publicly was part of what the Frierdiker Rebbe was looking for in the state of American Jewry, was to stay here and to settle in America, which is a very natural thing. If all the Russian Yidden are transplanting themselves in America, so it's very natural for the Frierdiker Rebbe's place to be in America. However, the Yiddishkeit here was not up to par. It wasn't Shliach to make a yeshivas Tamei Tumim yet. That took many more years. There was no chinuch. There was no real gathering of chassidim in a way that the Frierdiker Rebbe felt that he could stay. Apparently, there's letters that were in where the Frierdiker Rebbe writes. No, not the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's the Frierdiker Rebbe's shver, Rabbi Avram Schneerson, wrote letters to his daughter Rebbe Tzimcha Medina, and he writes in those letters during the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit in America. He writes, "I hear that they're staying in America, and that it's only a question of going back, or wrapping things up in Riga and moving to America." He writes with a pashtus that's what's happening. And the chassidim over the months in America, the chassidim in America started to ask and started to request and to put and make vadim and to make efforts to actually make it happen. But in the end, the Frierdiker Rebbe said he's not ready to come. He's not ready to stay. And there's a few reasons, but he ended up going back to Warsaw, and it's
what are the reasons,
right? So one reason the Frierdiker Rebbe writes is that he told Yisrael Jacobson many years later that mein inyan is chassidim and chassidus, and when he came to America, it was also asken tziburi. The Frierdiker Rebbe was coming, and he was fundraising money, and he was raising awareness, and he felt that that's not the image that he wants the Frierdiker Rebbe to show up with. It doesn't fit what he wanted to do. So it was the wrong style, basically. It was the wrong approach, and he wanted to do it separately. There's another one where the Frierdiker Rebbe just said that the Ruchnis is not there. And when the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to Chassidim that he's not staying in America, he said, keep on making bimiyas shiur chassidus, keep on working on chinuch hakosher, keep working on all these things. And the implication is pretty clear that as soon as America is an appropriate place for the Frierdiker Rebbe to come and to open Tamei Tumim, for example, then he's going to do it immediately. And in Tzadik Tes, Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson spoke. The Frierdiker Rebbe told Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson that he's coming to America. They already made plans right before World War II broke out. It so happens to be at the exact same time that Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson brought the American Bachar from Teir Vadas to Tamei Tumim in Poland. In other words, as soon as there's a nucleus of people to make a Tamei Tumim in America, you see at the exact same time the Frierdiker Rebbe is planning to move to America.
So you're saying that the Frierdiker Rebbe was planning on moving to America in 1939, regardless of the war?
Regardless of the war, the Frierdiker Rebbe says that in one of the sichas, early sichas, the Frierdiker Rebbe, I think by the Kabbalas Panim during the war, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, "I didn't come here as a refugee." And when you hear that, it's strange. What do you mean you didn't come here as a refugee? You came here as a refugee. You was saved out of the war. But the Frierdiker Rebbe had already had plans to move to America. Someone once argued to me that the Frierdiker Rebbe had already given the power of attorney to Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson to move the Frierdiker Rebbe's library to America. In other words, he had already been makna his library to Agudas Chassidic Chabad of America during that visit of Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson. I haven't seen it printed. I didn't look too hard, but
during a visit of Rabbi Yisrael to Poland.
During Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson's visit from America to Poland, the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke to him about the move to America, and there was already plans to get visas for the Frierdiker Rebbe's family and for a group of Bachrim and a group of Chassidim to come to America, and all the plans were in motion. And the war broke out in the middle of those plans, and the plans didn't have a chance to actually happen. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe arrived, he wasn't here as a refugee. He was moving to America because he wanted to move to America to bring Chabad here and to do it in America. And it just so happened, unfortunately, that the war broke out in the middle, and the Frierdiker Rebbe had to be saved from the Nazis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to 1929.
Yeah, so the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming to America, and there's a very, very interesting resource of descriptions of the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit here. So in general, it's very interesting that in Eretz Yisrael, the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Eretz Yisrael, there's beautiful descriptions of everything, but what's even more is that there's the Sichas, and there's Maimarim, and there's a detailed Yuman from the Chassidim who traveled around, because Eretz Yisrael was a from place that had a lot of Chassidim there. So when the Rebbe came, it was the Rebbe coming. They did whatever Chassidim do around the Rebbe. In America, there were some Chassidim here, but the Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling for 10 months, and there's nothing of the sort. There's many sichas. I mean, the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke in every single city countless times, and we have very few sichas from there. There's not that many Maimarim either, which usually the Frierdiker Rebbe himself wrote, but he didn't write everything. But what there is amazing newspaper descriptions, because the Jewish press in America was very excited. This is a major figure. It's very interesting. I was trying to see is there any other Jewish figure, Manig Yisrael, use whatever term you want, that had that type of reception when the Frierdiker Rebbe had in 1929. The amount of the thousands of people that came out in every city after city, time after time, thousands and thousands of people, literally thousands. It's mind-boggling, and the excitement, and there's all, because if a Pelish Rebbe came, how many of the Russian Jews knew this specific Pelish Rebbe? If a Rav came, knew, say there, but when the Frierdiker Rebbe came, this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe that they all heard about from their grandparents and great grandparents and great grandparents. It's that same dynasty. It's the same Enochel. And to top it all off, this is right after the Frierdiker Rebbe had been very famous in being in Russia itself as the only Jewish leader who's in Russia fighting the communists, and the one who's keeping Yiddishkeit alive, and that he was arrested and he was in prison and he was released, and that was in world news. So the Frierdiker Rebbe it was like a pinnacle of fame that everyone in the world knew about the Frierdiker Rebbe at the time. And what's even more interesting is that because it was right then, the Frierdiker Rebbe Chabad didn't really exist as a huge institution anywhere else. So all the regular politics that happens when you have an institution didn't exist then. It's not like if today, if the Rebbe would come in any specific city, well, you would have the Reform synagogue who's offended by the Shliach here, and there's all the natural politics that would happen in a place based on whatever the meistas are. But when the Frierdiker Rebbe comes to America, there's none of that. It's only excitement. It's unknown. The only people that weren't so excited is that Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson writes that the heads of the joint were afraid of the Frierdiker Rebbe's influence, so they tried to block the richest American Jews from meeting the Frierdiker Rebbe. They tried to dampen the enthusiasm. But
wasn't the joint contributing to the Frierdiker Rebbe financially?
Yes. The joint was supporting the entire Russian efforts. But that's what he writes. He writes that I don't remember exactly which organization.
Maybe they wanted to control it instead of.
That could be. Yeah. He writes that they were afraid of the Frierdiker Rebbe's influence, and they tried to dampen the excitement a little bit. But in the regular Amcha, the regular people, this was very exciting. You have pictures of full Hebrew schools coming, like full day, schools, kids. And Rabbi Lando from St. Louis made a beautiful article on Chabad.org about the Frierdiker Rebbe's visit to St. Louis. You see, they brought all the kids in a choir with flags, and like all the regular Jewish community people, everyone was coming to see the Rebbe. It was an excitement like no other. And you see, you have all these beautiful newspaper descriptions, but what you also have is letters from the Frierdiker Rebbe himself to Rebbetzin Chamadina. She didn't come along on the trip, so it means the Frierdiker Rebbe was away from the Rebbetzin for a whole year. So he writes these beautiful letters to her. It's very different than his own Yuman. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Yuman in those years is very short. He just writes like scheduling, 2 hours for a maimer. He prepared a maimer. He davened. He wrote letters. He just writes like his schedule pretty much. But in these letters, he writes with the full arichas, with the full description of everything that's going on. And he writes also, like, it's almost surprising to write how candidly he's writing, to see how candidly he's writing about the success and about how many people. And he always ends off, 1,000 people came, 500 people came, 2,000 people came, and he writes that they say that Amerikanische Yidden are quick to warm up and quick to cool off. So, and it seems like almost he, in other words, the Rebbetzin there for a whole year, so the Frierdiker Rebbe is trying to give her a taste of what is really was tut menufda and what's being accomplished. And like in the opening letter, is he writes, it's very interesting how he says that on the ship to America, usually the Frierdiker Rebbe traveled a lot. He didn't always travel with a big entourage. He traveled with a few people. So he has a cabin on a ship, and then if you don't sit in the cabin all day, you go sit on the deck, or you sit in they had writing rooms, and the Frierdiker Rebbe would sit with a ksav, or with papers, or with whatever he was doing to write, or to learn, or to read. And he said he was always and he writes that he's always comfortable. He doesn't care that people stare at him. He always gets stares because the Frierdiker was coming with a kapata. Usually he was sitting with his tzitzis open and a yarmulke and a beard, and he doesn't look like anything of the regular people there. So he gets some stares, but he minds his own business and nobody bothers him. And then he writes that on this ship the same thing happened. But at some point, like 2 days before they arrive in America, all of a sudden, when he came out to the deck, he noticed that the whole ship was staring at him. The people were whispering, things were going on. There was a big tararam around the Frierdiker Rebbe being there. And then he writes that later he heard that the captain of the ship had just received a message from land saying that before you come into the harbor, you're going to stop. There's a small boat, a tugboat's going to come meet you, and there's a very important personage on your ship, and he's going to be taken out on this boat instead of going through the regular customs of Ellis Island or wherever it would have been. And he's going to get his someone's getting VIP treatment. And he heard that. He told people on the ship. Suddenly they chavzich that there's a VIP person on the ship, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says he walked out, and all of a sudden he sees everybody staring at him, and nothing happened. But then he came to America. He came to America.
Didn't the Frierdiker Rebbe get very sick on the trip on the boat?
That's a story about Dr. Wallach. He was. No, actually, it probably wasn't that ship. So the Frierdiker Rebbe left Eretz Yisrael to come to America, but the way you did that was through Europe. He went on a ship back to Berlin. In Berlin, he met with the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin and other Chassidim in Berlin, and then he went from there. From Berlin, he came to America.
So it's really independent. So the trip to Eretz Yisrael is an independent trip.
He didn't go back to Riga, but
okay, I'm saying he was. But he came back to Europe. Then he
came back to Europe. Exactly, yeah. In the middle, there was a few days that he was in Berlin. At some point, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave the Rebbe all the ksavim. I don't know if it was before Eretz Yisrael or it was before America. So the story, I'll tell you the story of Dr. Wallach, and then I'll tell you this thing that with Dr. Wallach, I think. I don't remember. I don't have the story from the sources. It's a story that's told, but I imagine it was on the ship from Eretz Yisrael. Right after the Frierdiker Rebbe left Eretz Yisrael was the pogrom in Hebron and throughout Eretz Yisrael, the Tafish
the massacre,
the 1929 massacres, and it was right after the Frierdiker Rebbe had visited Hebron and had been at Mars Machpelah, and so when the Frierdiker Rebbe heard about it on the ship, he got very, very sick. He felt terrible, and Dr. Wallach was there on the ship. Dr. Wallach was a very famous doctor of Eretz Yisrael, of the Shari Tzedek Hospital in Yerushalayim. And he was on a trip. So I imagine this is out of Eretz Yisrael. He was an Eretz Yisrael guy, so he's leaving on the ship. And they say that he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe for a tikkun afterwards. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, why do you need a tikkun? He took care of me. And he said, if the Eibishter is maktim refuah l'maka, if I wouldn't have been on the ship, the Eibishter would have never allowed you to become sick in the first place. So that's what he wanted a tikkun for being present there. So in Berlin, the Rebbe came there. The Rebbe was living in Berlin, and the Frierdiker Rebbe came there and gave the Rebbe all the ksavim.
By the way, when the Frierdiker Rebbe left, for example, for Tishrei, the Frierdiker Rebbe put the Rebbe in charge of the Chassidim during Tishrei and Riga. That's a whole other thing. And recently a newspaper article came out about that, how the Rebbe angeführt with the Chassidim.
I didn't see that. There's a letter. No, I didn't see that article.
There's a new article that came out just now before Gamot Tammuz. And the title, I believe, is the Rebbe, der Student.
Oh, interesting.
Basically writing about the Rebbe, who's not the Rebbe yet.
Right. But he's fearing on.
No, there's this Rebbe, there's this student, the student Rebbe. And it describes Barichas, how the Rebbe looks, but the Rebbe ungefähr mamish like a Rebbe. And
I'll have to see it.
A very nice article.
Yeah. The main letter is El Yechaim Altes. El Yechaim Altes has a beautiful description of that Tisha. I think we printed it many years ago, maybe 10 years ago or so in the Derher.
The Rebbe ran the whole thing.
Right. And El Yechaim writes to the Frierdiker Rebbe that he's pained that I'm pained that you'll never ever see this side of the Rebbe because in front of you he's always a Zebibittel, so you're never.
He writes it to the Frierdiker Rebbe.
He writes to the Frierdiker Rebbe directly. He says, I feel sad that you'll never see this side of your Edom. Yeah, and so during that's Tishrei. The Rebbe was there during Tishrei, so the Frierdiker Rebbe gave the Rebbe all the ksavim for safekeeping during his trips. And someone told me something very interesting. All the ksavim of the Rebbeim. The Frierdiker Rebbe had suitcases, or one suitcase, where he kept all the ksavim of all the Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe, Mitzvah Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, all the early ksavim of the Rebbe Rashab. Whatever he had, whatever the Rebbeim kept, those weren't part of the regular library. That was a special suitcase or a few suitcases that he kept. All the ksavim were there. And he watched over it like it was in the Yechidus room by the Frierdiker Rebbe. It was behind this chair in the fireplace. There was it looks like a fireplace. It's a closed fireplace. That was where the ksavim were held. So during his trip to America, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave it to the Rebbe, and that's when the Rebbe made all the mafteches of Chassidus, and that's when he made copies of Ayin Beis and Samach Vav and all the Chassidus that the Rebbe printed later, because many of those Ksavim, I hope I'm not mixing up a few stories here, but those Ksavim were later stuck after when the Frierdiker Rebbe ran away from the Nazis. Many Ksavim got stuck there, and they only came back with the Ksavim from Poland that I believe you wrote about maybe 15 years ago in the Derher, a very interesting article.
Yeah.
So there was no so all they had was the Rebbe's copies. Lamed Ches, yeah. So till Lamed Ches, we had only the Rebbe's copies.
Yeah.
Right. So we only had the Frierdiker Rebbe's copies, the Rebbe's copies. And what's interesting is someone told me that if you look in the Rebbe's Mafteches, there's things missing there. Not only the Siches from the Frierdiker Rebbe in America are missing because nobody was there to write them, but even the Maimarim, the Frierdiker Rebbe said Maimarim in America. Before leaving, he took with him the Ksavim that he wanted to base the Maimarim off of. The Frierdiker Rebbe says a Maimar, any that Rebbeim said a Maimar, it's based on a Maimar from the previous generations, or a few Maimarim. So he took with him the specific Ksavim. He planned ahead. He took whatever Ksavim he wanted for the year. So when the Rebbe wrote all the Mafteches, there's missing Dibra Maschels from the collection, and if you look carefully, it's the same Dibra Maschels that the Frierdiker Rebbe says in America. That's just an interesting aside about what the Rebbe had.
But why didn't the Frierdiker Rebbe want to take them with him to America?
I would imagine it was probably a safety thing. You know, schlep it on a long journey, and who's going to be. I thought he was probably more safe in Berlin.
Okay.
So yeah, the Frierdiker Rebbe came, and so he came to America. It was Yud Beis Elul Tafresh Peites, right before Tishrei. He came to America. That's when the visit started.
Among Chassidim is brought to you by A Chassidisher Derher. We live in a chaotic world, a world where for us Chassidim is a seinu, lei ra'inu. We do not have the ability to hear and see the Rebbe on a daily basis. Yet we know that the Rebbe is very much with us, and the Chassidus Chabad is alive and thriving more than ever before. One needs to only tap into it. A Chassidisher Derher provides you and your family with the tools necessary to tap into all of this. Whether it's the monthly magazine, the way it all began, whether it's Derher books, Derher online content, and so much more. Men, women, and children throughout the world benefit and use these tools on a daily basis. Whether it's children enjoying the children's magazine that comes along with the regular Derher, or enjoying the children's podcast, whether it's Bachrim in yeshivas receiving the Derher, whether it's girls in high schools enjoying Derher club in their local high school. People all over the world and from all walks of life enjoy and utilize these tools and take advantage of it. If you're not already subscribed to Derher monthly magazine, do so today at derher.org. That's derher.org. Derher is a dynamic organization which is committed to continue providing these tools, grow on a constant basis, and do all that we can to help this effort. Baruch Hashem, it takes a lot of resources and finances to make this all happen. You can be part of Derher through your financial support as well, through visiting our website derher.org, or through contacting us to setting up a meeting. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
And you see from the very beginning, another interesting thing, I don't know if we wrote much about this in the article, is that the Chassidim, there's a small group of Chassidim
in the
current article, and the article was written, it's coming out in Cheshvan, Mirz Hashem. So there's a small group of Chassidim who have to take care of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Yisrael Jacobson is the main person, and he also wrote his Zechreines. There was Agudas Chassidic Chabad, so there were people like Chazak Kramer, who was the head of the Agudas Chassidic Chabad, but he wasn't a Chassid, he was a Balabas. And there was Mendy Greenberg, was another, I think that was his name. I think it was Mendy Greenberg that was the head of Aguch on the Chassid. He was the Chassid that was the head of the Aguch. And there was a bunch of young Galite. And suddenly, the Rebbe is coming. How do you treat the Rebbe? The Rebbe is showing up. You have to make sure that the Rebbe has a place to stay, and that the Rebbe is fed, and like whatever you would think. And for Chassidim, they're going out of their minds. How in the world are we going to take care of the Rebbe? And the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming. The people that usually took care of the Gashmis of the Frierdiker Rebbe weren't there because that was his family. And the Rebbe Tzin is staying home, and no one else is coming. It was the Frierdiker Rebbe came with Rashag, and a few other people in his entourage. There was Mordechai Dubin came at the beginning for a short period of time. Reb Moshe Harnstein, the Frierdiker Rebbe's uncle, was there also during the visit for, I think, a period of the visit. And there were two secretaries, Chaim Lieberman and Itche and Chachafegin.
Shafeg.
They were Chachafegin. So those the two secretaries, they came a week early to help set things up, and they were okay. So the Chassidim had to try to figure out where's the Frierdiker Rebbe going to stay. So Rabbi Simpson was the Rav of a shul, and they had just built a new shul in Borough Park, and there was an apartment on top of the shul where he was going to live. And they said, perfect. We have a shul. We have an apartment for living. It was brand new, so he said it's perfect. And Rabbi Simpson was excited that the Frierdiker Rebbe was going to inaugurate his own home. That's the biggest covet in the world. And the problem was that they saw the Chassidim suspected that this is not masim for royalty. I don't know exactly why. They don't say why.
The apartment.
The apartment. Maybe it was too small. Maybe it was just simple. But the Chassidim had this feeling that when the Rebbe comes to town, it's pasnish that there's a little apartment on top of a shul. It looks like a little shtibel and a little Frierdiker Rebbe who has a shul in his dining room, and that's the whole story. There's something there that wasn't up to par for what was passed when the Rebbe comes. And Yisrael Jacobson writes that he tried to bring it up, and it was part of the discussion. But Chazak Kramer, the head of Agudas Chassidei Chabad, I mean, he was basically the one paying, or I guess he was running it, and he didn't understand. And he says, Yisrael Jacobson says that Kramer himself had never met a Rebbe before. He came from a Chabad town in Europe, but he was in America. He was now living in America. He didn't come from a Chassidisher family. So all he had met. I thought
the Kramers are Chabad family.
No, they weren't. They came from a Chabad town, a town that had a lot of Chassidim. So they had a lot of Shayachas with Chassidim, and they knew, like they got they related well to Chassidim, but I don't think they themselves were from a Chabad family. Not at least what Rabbi Jacobson writes.
So how did they become the go-to people?
They needed a gvir and a bar poel to be involved in a goch. And he was very close with Chassidim anyway, because in those days people were close with their landsman. If you came from the same town, you joined the shul. Nusach, there's Nusach Hari Niezh, and there was Nusach Hari Babroisk, and these were city shuls. People were close with the people where they came from. So Chazak was close with Chabad Chassidim, so they brought him in, and he became the Balabas, and he was very helpful. It wasn't like, but Yisrael Jacobson says he didn't get. He says in his mind, the Rebbe was just another one of the Gute Yidden that come to America, Chadashim Labkarim, to fundraise. And they're people. They come, they do their fundraising, and they go. And in his mind, he said the Rebbe is the greatest of these Gute Yidden. He didn't appreciate that this is this is a whole different farnam. This is a whole different story. So then the Frierdiker Rebbe came, and Taka didn't work, and Lepayel they moved it. So you see in the video, the Frierdiker Rebbe stands on the second floor of a balcony, and he looks down and he says a sikha to the crowd. That's by Rabbi Simpson shul. That's Rabbi Simpson shul. But very quickly, that's in Borough Park. But very quickly they moved, and they moved to a house.
So he did stay there.
He stayed there for a little bit, and they realized right at the beginning that das passt nicht, and they quickly moved to a house in Crown Heights, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's on Brooklyn and St. John's, where Anash.org just had a whole article on all the different places where the Frierdiker Rebbe stayed and spoke, and by Shmuley Super wrote a very nice article, and he has all the pictures there, and he writes there that it just happens to be that the same house later was bought by the Baba Rebbe, and that was his house. It's just interesting. But the Frierdiker Rebbe was in that house.
Because when the Baba Rebbe, his headquarters was in Crown Heights.
Yeah, he lived in Crown Heights in the early
50s
years.
And 60s,
yeah. So that was their headquarters, I guess.
And that house doesn't exist anymore.
No, the house it's a building. It's a building. I believe it's a building. Or something like
that. But then it was a nice house. I saw the picture from the
a big beautiful home. Yeah, and you can see right away that it's much more malchustic than the original place that they had, which was a shtibel and an apartment. I'm sure it was okay and decent, but it wasn't what they needed. And Yisrael Jacobson writes even more that they didn't understand how to keep a place. Like he said we were batlonim grina yeshiva bachrim adayim azeh. That's what he writes about himself when he was writing the story. And he says that they didn't know how to prepare food. They didn't know how to. So at some point they didn't know how to keep a place clean, and they realized that this is a big problem. They didn't know what they're doing. So they hired someone. They hired a bacher who worked in one of the high class hotels and knew how to serve a meal and knew how to set up a place and knew how to. So when they bring food to the Frierdiker Rebbe, it should be like on the highest level anywhere. And he told them he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe. He would bring the food to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he said later that he told them that the Frierdiker Rebbe's table manners are at the highest level of even the most aristocratic circles, which confirmed to Rabbi Jacobson that he didn't know what he was doing. I'm like, but the other problem he writes is that the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't eat. He writes that Chachafegin would complain to him when he walked. He came once to see the Rebbe after they came back from a visit to another city. He came back to New York, And he comes to Chassidisher Derher, and Chassidisher Derher says he doesn't know what to do. The Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't eat anything. And the first thing was that on a day the Frierdiker Rebbe came to a new town, he would fast. And when he came to Chicago and 10,000 people come out to see the Frierdiker Rebbe on the streets, and then he would go to, there would be a big Kabbalas party in a shul where thousands more people would come see him, and then people would come for Yechidus. That day, the Frierdiker Rebbe wouldn't eat anything. And Yisrael Jacobson says that he heard from Nissen Talushkin that the Frierdiker Rebbe said, maybe he heard this even from the Rebbe Rashab, Kavod darf man eis darin. You have to fast out kavod. On a day the Frierdiker Rebbe got kavod, he didn't eat anything. And that was just, it was a rule. There's no food. Yeah, because it was a ruchnistic thing. The Frierdiker Rebbe, if he's getting kavod, and based on, it's not us to imagine what the Rebbeim, what the kavod feels like, but whenever there was kavod, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't eat. And then even after that, he wasn't eating. I think in the Yomana, the Frierdiker Rebbe himself, he writes on Pesach, which Pesach was extra because of all the Hidurim that what the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted to eat. On Yom Tov, the Frierdiker Rebbe ate only the shiurim of Sudas and by the Seder. Basically, didn't eat anything else, and some hot water. On Chalamayid, on one day or maybe 2 days, you ate like 2 hard-boiled eggs that Chassidisher boiled up. That the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't eat, and Chassidisher was going crazy, and he said he felt like the Rebbe's here. The Rebbe's on his achrayas because there's no one else. But which chassid is going to tell the Rebbe that you have to eat? That's not something that chassidim do. And Yisrael Jacobson writes that he ozar emetz and he gathered the courage and he went into Yichidus and he told the Frierdiker Rebbe that the Bnei Bayis are not here to watch on your health and we're all very worried and the Rebbe should eat. The Rebbe shouldn't fast so much. And the Frierdiker Rebbe basically mocked him up and he said, I don't need the food, whatever. And he said, yeah. The Frierdiker Rebbe told him, Taka, when your wife made a kichlach, Taka last night we came back, I ate 1 kichel from that your wife made, Chalav Yisrael kichel that they had made sure that they had worked very hard to prepare. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Taka, his wife worked hard. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, I Taka ate 1, but only 1 and not the whole thing. And it's very interesting to see the whole description, and it continued throughout the whole visit, where the Chassidim, the close Chassidim are struggling on how do you treat the Rebbe? Like what are we doing here? There's one forward article that a very interesting forward article where the forward correspondent in Washington D.C. Farvards, yeah, the Yiddish Farvards, which you imagine is not exactly a newspaper that is excited about from a Yidden or Torah and mitzvahs and anything like that. So the correspondent in Washington wrote an article about his visit with the Frierdiker Rebbe in Washington. At the very end of the visit, the Frierdiker Rebbe came to Washington D.C. and met with President Hoover. He met with President Hoover, and he said it was to thank President Hoover for his efforts on behalf of the Jewish people and for the Jews of Russia. And there's no details about the meeting, at least not printed. Maybe somebody has, and I don't have access to that. But there's no details of what actually happened in the meeting. It's just we know that the Frierdiker Rebbe went there and spoke and met with the president. So, but this forward reporter writes a whole article, and he describes the whole arichas, how he imagined how disappointed he would be. He thought that an old-fashioned Rebbe from the old world is going to come see the president. Was bushes it's going to be, because the American Jews in those days were all about fitting in, and if you didn't do exactly what the American thing, it was considered very embarrassing. It was very, very embarrassing. So he was traumatized. He hears a Chassidisher Rebbe is going to come and visit the president. What's he going to do here? It's a disaster. And then he comes and then he writes how impressed he was and how he had a yechidus with the Frierdiker Rebbe for 15 minutes. Then he spoke with Hashag for a few hours, and he writes how he's speaking to intelligent people. He says the Frierdiker Rebbe is such an intelligent person and such a spiritual person, and it was so beautiful. And the Hashag, he was so impressed. He's so well spoken. But then he said he was pasha disappointed. He was terribly disappointed because he looked in the Frierdiker Rebbe's hotel room. He saw matzahs, and he said matzahs, all Jewish matzahs in a fancy Washington D.C. hotel room. He couldn't believe that you're bringing matzahs into the hotel room. And he says that at the end, he says in his conversation with the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe told he mentioned about a certain Jew, and he told the Frierdiker Rebbe, Zayid mit dem ganzen Herzen. He's a Jew with his entire heart. So the Frierdiker Rebbe told him, I'm not impressed with a Jew who's mit dem ganzen Herzen. Mit darf sein mit der ganzen Kopf, mit der Hand, mit der Fist, mit der ganzen Körper. You have to be a Jew with your entire body too. In other words, you have mitzvahs maisias. So, and then he says, and as I'm listening to the Rebbe say these words, and I thought to myself, and for sure you mean that a Jew with a whole body means you have to schlep matzahs into the fancy Washington D.C. hotel room, and he was traumatized, terribly traumatized. And then he says how he took Rashag and a few of the other people there to a kosher restaurant in Washington D.C. to eat something, and he says he was again disappointed because in a fancy establishment you take off your hat, but the Rebbe Rashab, the Rashag sat with his. He calls it he has some funny name. I don't remember what, but for the top hat, the Rashag had a tall hat that he wore in America, a top hat, and he says that the Rashag sat with a hat the entire time. He didn't take off. He said, "You don't take off your hat," and he said he was very, very disappointed. That was the extent of his disappointment there. But again, you see the Frierdiker Rebbe, schlepping matzahs in Washington D.C. That was just an interesting aspect of the entire trip.
So what was the fundraising efforts? Like the Frierdiker Rebbe met with the Gvirim, people came to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Like what was that?
The
like?
Fundraising efforts were mainly the main fundraising efforts were appeals that they would make in every city. There was an official announcement in the newspapers that the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to come to us to whatever shul, and he's going to speak, and there's going to be appeals. And it was a very formal event. You would have one of the very big shuls of the city. They would find one of the biggest shuls, one of the biggest frum shuls, and you would have thousands of people there. And usually there was more people than the shul could handle. And there would be a series of speakers. We have a description of Detroit, a description of St. Louis, there's a description of Chicago, where there would be a speaker who would introduce another speaker and then introduce another speaker, and they would speak about Lubavitch in Russia, and they would speak about what the Frierdiker Rebbe did in the Soviet Union, and they would speak about the Frierdiker Rebbe in general. And like one reporter says, how the Frierdiker Rebbe was then introduced by someone who knew the Rebbe, by Rabbi Fein, who knew Rabbi Schneerson back in Russia, and he had some interesting things to say about the matter. And then they would introduce the Frierdiker Rebbe. And it's some articles it looks like the Frierdiker Rebbe would sit there a whole time. In some articles it looks like the Frierdiker Rebbe would show up at that point. But that was like a moment of electric shock. When the Rebbe is coming, the Rebbe is standing up. Everybody would stand up and look to see. In one article, they say the Frierdiker Rebbe that everybody stood the entire time while the Frierdiker Rebbe was talking, like a Sikh in 770. Everybody was standing, and everybody would crane their eyes. So in these events, the Frierdiker Rebbe would give a speech, and he would speak about the Yidden in Russia, and he would speak about Yiddishkeit in America and about Torah mitzvahs. And there's little snippets in the descriptions where one article says how the Frierdiker Rebbe said that when it comes to Russian Jewry, it's better less words and more action. In other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe can't come. He's fundraising for Russian Jewry, but at the same time, he knows that if he's going to speak out against the Russian government, they're going to know immediately, and they can have retribution against the Chassidim in Russia. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is always being very careful what to say and what not to say. And another time it says how he speaks how American Jews, you need to know that you can be a Yid in America, and you can be frum in America, and you can do Torah mitzvahs here, and you have to strengthen Yiddishkeit. And part of that entire event, there would be an appeal. One of the rabbis gets up and says, we're making an appeal for Russian Jews. And people would take out money. I mean, in appeals, there was no credit cards or anything. It was all cash on the spot. So everybody took out cash. Maybe they had checks. I'm sure they had checks too. So people would right away just pass up money from the rafters and from the Viber shul and from the back of the shul. Money would just get thrown to the front. And they would collect it. And the problem was, the sad thing was, when 2 months after the Frierdiker Rebbe came, was the stock market crash and the Great Depression of 1929. So a lot of people did not have a lot of money. And the results were actually very, very not what they hoped for. In one description in Detroit, they say they collected $800 that night. In St. Louis, they got $1,600. And in those days, that was a lot more money, but this wasn't be'erech to what the Frierdiker Rebbe was actually hoping to get from American Jews for Russia. But so that was the appeal.
Do we have from the Frierdiker Rebbe where he writes this? How do we know this?
This is widely reported, and I think it's pretty much common knowledge. I can't remember right now if it's in the articles. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. I'm just wondering if we have anything from the Frierdiker Rebbe about this.
I don't recall offhand seeing anything from the Frierdiker Rebbe. A disappointment.
When was the crash? When was the crash? It was in
Cheshvan time. I don't remember the English date, but I looked. I matched it with the Hebrew dates. It was the Frierdiker Rebbe came Yud Beis Elul or Yud Gimel Elul, and it was in Cheshvan time, right after. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was here Tishrei, and he didn't travel anywhere until Cheslev Sev Shvat.
So he started the traveling.
So the traveling and the real fundraising happened after the Great Depression. And there's also an aspect is that a Rebbe is not a fundraiser. A good fundraiser, to fundraise money, you do whatever you need to fundraise money. And some people, so whatever you do, whatever it takes. But the Rebbe is the Rebbe, so he doesn't come to fundraise money. I think the Rebbe once said a whole sharp lashon that he doesn't fundraise money. The word fundraising even was like a fagrep de lashon. So in Detroit, there's a story that there's a person, Isidore Starr, who was later close with Rabbi Shem Tov, Baruch Shem Tov in Detroit. So he wrote his description of what he remembered from the visit. He was a boy, he was a bacher from a Nusach Hari family, and he was the Frierdiker Rebbe's translator in Yechidus during the visit to Detroit. And he said that a message came from a Gvir who claimed to have been the Frierdiker Rebbe's classmate in Russia, in Lubavitch. And he said he's going to give $100,000 if the Frierdiker Rebbe will come visit his home. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that the Frierdiker Rebbe thought about it and then came back and said that there's many worthy people that are deserving of visits, and to give or to do it for money would make them would put down all the people, the very worthy people. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said he doesn't want to make any differences. If he wants, he can make the donation and he'll get a letter of appreciation, but the Frierdiker Rebbe is not coming to his house. And that donation obviously never happened. And from hearsay, I've heard from people that heard from people, like the way the story was told in Detroit, that from what Isidore Starr told over is that, and he didn't write this in his Zechrenis, so I don't have it on paper, but that it was also about Shmir Shabbos, that this Gvir wasn't Shemer Shabbos, and the Frierdiker Rebbe comes to a place and is telling everyone to be Shemer Shabbos. Vasvar Panim Hotis, that he goes to the guy who grew up apparently with the Frierdiker Rebbe himself in Lubavitch. Maybe he was in Cheder in Lubavitch, and now he's not Shemer Shabbos. Vasvar Panim Hotis, that the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to give the only visit in Detroit is going to be to this guy. So that's the type of thing, the type of problems you have when the Frierdiker Rebbe is, when people are giving money. I mean, it was Yana Gelt ultimately. It wasn't. It didn't bring.
Didn't the Frierdiker Rebbe meet with certain special people? Didn't he meet Justice Brandeis?
Yeah. There were trips that Frierdiker Rebbe made, special trips. There were meetings that he made with specific people. Those
you know about Justice Brandeis?
Yes. I think it's in Toldos Chabad. They write about it. There was other people. There was planned meetings, and he met with the Jewish leadership.
There's a whole story about this. And a shout out to Rabbi Levi Mendelov, who told me about this little anecdote, which I didn't check. I didn't corroborate this, but apparently, when the Frierdiker Rebbe, Justice Brandeis was instrumental in helping the Frierdiker Rebbe escape from the Nazis later. Now, apparently, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Eretz Yisrael, the Frierdiker Rebbe met with Rav Kook.
Yeah.
And there's a whole story because Rav Kook's mother was
a Chabad family.
A Chabad family, so she asked the Frierdiker Rebbe for a bracha. She was there.
Yeah.
And the Frierdiker Rebbe asked Rav Kook who he should be going to visit in the U.S. And I thought for fundraising purposes, but I'm not sure. And apparently Rav Kook told the Frierdiker Rebbe you should meet Justice Brandeis.
Very interesting.
And the Frierdiker Rebbe met him, and then later he was instrumental in helping the Frierdiker Rebbe
come out of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I think so.
Very interesting.
Everyone should please double check if I got the whole story right. But
I didn't see that story. There were definitely meetings. The Frierdiker Rebbe definitely went to meetings with major leadership. But in a regular city, he came. There was the appeal, and then people came for Yechidus. Many people came for Yechidus. There was a never-ending line of people who would come for Yechidus. And it's interesting. I think in other words, it seems like the money side was a disappointment. But what was not a disappointment was the Yiddishkeit side. Thousands of people came to see the Frierdiker Rebbe, and people went into Yechidus, and they came out with Achlatas Tevus. There was shiurim. The Frierdiker Rebbe started in places. The effect is unbelievable. You see it in the newspaper articles how they say young women who seem to be far from Yiddishkeit. The reporter says these women seem to be far from Yiddishkeit, like the North Pole to the South Pole, and yet they come and they promise the Frierdiker Rebbe that they're going to keep Taras HaMishpacha, or they're going to keep Shabbos, or they're going to keep something, whatever mitzvahs the Frierdiker Rebbe told them to keep. And the Frierdiker Rebbe himself writes, you have also a lot of descriptions, which is very special. Besides for these appeals that would make, like the Kabbalas Panims and the appeals, the Frierdiker Rebbe would say Chassidus, and it would be at a special announcement. It was usually in a shul that was a Nusach Hari shul in whatever given city. The Nusach Hari shuls in those days were very big. In the Frierdiker Rebbe Davin on Rosh Hashanah in a Nusach Hari shul in Brownsville that had 1,200 seats. Like today, people know, like I know here in Cleveland, there's a Nusach Hari shul called Tzemach Tzedek, which is a tiny shul. It probably had, I don't know if they can fit in 100 people, but that's probably a newer shul, and the previous version of that shul probably had many more seats. That's like in the downtown areas where there are no Yidden anymore. So the Nusach Hari shuls were big shuls, and it would say
all over the place. Also in Canada, Toronto had a Nusach Hari, big Nusach Hari shul.
Panchi Lubavitch or Nusach Hari or Tzemach Tzedek or something like that. And they would put out notices that the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to say Achsidis or a Maimer Chassidus, and people would come, everybody would the Frierdiker would come in. There would be crowds of people crushing, and there would be too many people outside and inside, and the whole shul would be packed to the rafters. And the Frierdiker would come in, and there's whole long descriptions how he walked in slowly and carefully, and he would sit down at the head, usually where they have the chashva seats at the front of a shul in those days, or maybe on the bima, and he would sit for a few minutes in utter silence, thinking, being mizbainen, and the whole shul would be standing there quiet, totally quiet. And then he would start the maimer, and he would say a maimer, and the maimarim are, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says how he writes. He says the maimarim are always have inyanim that everyone can understand, even if it's not everything. And you can look at the maimarim from America; they're talking very, very easy. Although they're still maimarim. There are certain pieces that I'm sure not everyone understood. And it would be a maimer, let's say for an hour, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. The maimarim in those days were long. And afterwards, people would chazer it, and it was a very, very special thing. You can tell from the descriptions that this is something that the Jews in America had never really experienced. To see a Rebbe, to be like you're in the Rebbe's presence, the ruchnis of that was something. It was very, very powerful. And people would later chazer the maimarim, or they would chazer things over to their shuls or to the people that what the Frierdiker Rebbe said and which parts, and everybody would compete. Who understood what and how much did you understand? And one of the most special things is the people who themselves had been to Rebbe. You have America was full of old Alte Yidden who had themselves gone to Rabbeim previously. If it was their Brashab, their Marash, even the Samach Tzedek perhaps. And you also had Chassidim of the other streams of Chabad. You had Kaposters, you had Liadi, you had Niezhin. There were people from all of those places, and some of them, and like Babrois, the last branch of Kapos that before none of those streams existed was Babroisk. And Bishmayanech Babroisker, he passed away only 6 years before this visit. He passed away in Tafresh Pei Gimel. This is Tafresh Pei Tes, Tafresh Tzadik. So you have tons of these people that are 40, 50, 60 years old. They had been to Lubavitch. They had experienced all of this with their parents. And the newspaper articles describe how they're there and they're just in tears, and they're emotional like it's the most emotional thing that has ever happened to them. One in Chicago, there's one description. A reporter says he sees an old Jew standing there with his kids and his eneklach, and he's dancing and he's excited and he's crying. And what are you so excited about? And he said, I can't wait to see the Rebbe is going to come. I saw his grandfather. I saw their marash, and he says, "You want to know why I'm so old? Why I had Arichas Yamim? Why I'm 90 years old today? Because every time I saw their marash, I got another 10 years of life. That's what it meant to see the Lichtige Panah from Rebbe. And now, I knew his son. I knew the Rebbe Rashab, and now I'm going to see the Einokel." And he started dancing, and you see this again and again and again of Chassidim v'Osam Zich upgelept, and the Frierdiker Rebbe in his own diaries and his own letters. In letters primarily, he writes. You see him. He writes how he sees when he walks out, when he shows up in the train station, when his face appears, and the looks of people. He sees how people are crying and excited all at the same time. Chedva, that the emotions were overwhelming. They are so excited to see the Frierdiker Rebbe, and brought back such memories, such strong memories from home. And the Frierdiker Rebbe always writes how, like a Yehiratzeh, that it should be poil and that should have a pull in Shechas, that these people should stay connected afterwards. And there were many people that changed after in the years following and had a much stronger Shechas Yiddishkeit.
When the Frierdiker Rebbe ultimately came to settle in America, for some reason you don't see such a thing of like the outreach to all the Chassidim all over the U.S., or maybe because the Frierdiker Rebbe just didn't travel as much. First of all, he did go, and he went to Chicago. I guess maybe the Frierdiker Rebbe wasn't traveling as much.
Yeah, the Frierdiker Rebbe barely traveled when he came to America, and maybe like I said, the Frierdiker Rebbe said that time he came as Askan Tziburi, and this time he came as Chassidim Chassidus. But you do see there were letters and there were connections. When the Frierdiker Rebbe went to Chicago, part in Tafshin Beis, on the itinerary was to visit the Shir Gemara Shir that he had told people to start in the previous visit. There had been Yoga Light there that came to visit the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe told me you have to start a Shir Gemara, and they had a Shir Gemara for a long time. And 10 years later, the Frierdiker Rebbe is coming back. 12 years later, and he's going to come visit. He's going to come visit this Gemara Shir. He's going to but Lepayel, Rebbe Steiner Sar passed away, and that trip was cut off, and the visit never happened. But you do see that, and it's you see also that types of connections in the years later by the Rebbe too. But the sad thing is that many of these people, they were basically a dying breed. If they were already 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, in all likelihood, their children were no longer had the same shaykhs like they had. And many of these people just went off. Either they came back or they went off and assimilated, and we don't have a shaykhs with them anymore. So that process was already happening. When by the time the Frierdiker Rebbe came in Tafresh Peites, Tafresh Tzaddik, Jews had been coming to America for 50 years. So the process of assimilation, but it happened, but it was already in full swing. So you had either the Frierdiker Rebbe caught them in Tafresh Peites, 10 years later you have to catch them again, or there's 10 years less of people that are there to work with, and that's the reality. Like even here in Cleveland, my great grandparents Zalman Kazin came here. Zalman Shula Kazin, he became the Rav of the Tzemach Tzedek Shul. The president of the Shul was a family member, their own family member from back in Russia, and who had, I think they were kaposters in back there, but he was the president of the Nus Harishal. Where's the family today? I mean,
they were related to
they were related to us. Yes, they were. It was my great grandfather's cousin, or second cousin, or third cousin. There was a family that was the Madarsky family that they knew, and they knew they had a relationship with Alt's family. But over the generations, either the way the Rebbe said in Nasicha and on Yudis Tammuz, I think Tavshel Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe says that when he speaks about Miyu Yehudi, that we know that pretty much there's a 4-generation rule that if either you have if the parents and the grandparents are not going to have a shaykhs Yiddishkeit, at some point the grandchildren are just going to be lost, and we have no shaykhs with them anymore. So and you see that all over, and you see that unfortunately with a lot of the Nuschari people. Yeah.
There's someone that I know that has a whole thesis how basically how so many famous Jews in America are mamish direct descendants of the Lubavitch Chassidim, like and related to other people, So for every person there's many family members or relatives that were already here and eventually assimilated.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the same thing was true about Russia too. That many of
them. I know.
I'm
not going to say any names, but I know a few people where I live here that have Lubavitcher names, Americanized versions of like very famous Lubavitcher names, and they're taka related. I mean, they
or
know
towns. There's also Chassidisher towns. There's there was similar things, similar names. There's many. Yes, there's no question. So the Frierdiker Rebbe there was making the shaykhs in the Tafresh Beites. I mean, there is a continuation in Tafresh Tzaddik. This Isidore Starr in Detroit, for example. He was the translator for the Frierdiker Rebbe during his visit in Tafresh Beites. Well, his family came. He came from a Nusachari family. His father, he writes, when the Frierdiker Rebbe when they heard the Frierdiker Rebbe was coming, that it was the Simcha in Shtat in his house. It looked like a Yom Tov if you would walk inside. That's the level of excitement. Even though his father had never seen the Rebbe or any of the other Rebbeim. But then later he writes that he was at the inauguration of Teim Chatumim on Bedford and Dean. I don't know what exactly the connection was over the years, but you see, he had a shaykhs with the Frierdiker Rebbe there. And then he came later to he saw, and he was by that hanachas, whatever the hanachas of an apino or the inauguration. And later he had a shaykhs with the shluchim when they came to Detroit. So the shaykhs is there. You definitely see pieces of shaykhs everywhere. In the article about St. Louis, Rabbi Lando has their very interesting thing where while the Frierdiker Rebbe was in St. Louis, there was a few frumma women who were upset that there was no good mikveh in St. Louis. In those days, Jews know how to build beautiful shuls. Beautiful shuls were everywhere in America, but a good mikveh, that nobody cared about. So while the Frierdiker Rebbe was sitting in the shul with 1,000 people there, a few women started making noise from the Weiber shul. They started banging with the benches or something, and the Frierdiker Rebbe looked up to see what the ruckus was about, and they called down that St. Louis needs a mikveh. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Okay, there's going to be a mikveh." He made a committee, and he left them. And he gave them a few rolls of pennies to give out to anyone that donates to the mikveh. So they had a dinner afterwards, and they had fundraising, and people got the pennies. And whoever was the committee, they gave out the pennies with a little card that had a picture of the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's a picture of the Frierdiker Rebbe in a spodik standing over a bookshelf with a sefer like this. From like the early years, in the early pays, and they say this coin. It says in Yiddish, this coin was given by the Lubavitch Rebbe to anyone who donates to the mikvah, and it should be. And he said, "B'schus havesi akdeshim," there should be a bracha and atzlacha for anyone who holds this coin. And Rabbi Landa, he writes that he didn't get it from Menorah. There was a family in St. Louis that still has the coin and still has the connection, and they have a shaykhs of the shluchim. So there is the long-term shaykhs you do see, but of course for if someone came and saw the Frierdiker Rebbe once for 5 minutes, I mean, it's a pelt after neshama, but over generations, the unfortunate reality is the assimilation of Jews in America. That's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to fight.
It continues. What are some of the other highlights of the Frierdiker Rebbe's trip? He went. Didn't he go to Wisconsin also?
Frierdiker Rebbe went to Wisconsin. He went to Chicago for a very long time. And from Chicago, he went for a short time to Milwaukee. After Chicago, he went to Detroit and St. Louis. Those were like short visits, just for a few days or even for a few hours, for a few days. Then he also went to Boston, and he went many cities. I don't remember all of them. And in every city, he went from shul to shul, all over New York. Mm-hmm.
He was based in New York the whole time.
Yeah. It was based in New York. The Frierdiker Rebbe was based in New York.
In Crown
He would come
Heights.
back. So in Crown Heights was the official house, and Rabbi Jacobson says that even though once they realized that even that they're not sure how to really fear Zacham with the Rebbe, so they decided that a hotel is better, and they just went to a hotel that still actually exists today. I don't know what it looks like today, but on the article on Ash.org they had a picture of it, and they have the address there where the Frierdiker Rebbe would often go to a hotel for a few days, but Tishrei was in that house in Crown Heights. And the Tishrei was very, very special because there was lots of Chassidim came, Chassidim that had been there previously, and younger generations. Everybody came to see, what's going to be what the Rebbe in Lubavitch. How does the Rebbe do Tishrei? And before Rosh Hashanah, a delegation came from the biggest Nusach Harishol in Brownsville that had 1,200 seats, and they asked the Frierdiker Rebbe to come down by him, and the Frierdiker Rebbe agreed. A big shul. And the Frierdiker Rebbe davened there Rosh Hashanah 3 hours on Rosh Hashanah night, and he came there when he says that when he came down the street walking into the shul, every window was open, every balcony was full of people looking out. He came with the shtaimel, with the spadik, and he davened Rosh Hashanah for 3 hours, and when he turned around, he said there were 3,000 people in the shul, and when the Frierdiker Rebbe turned around, there were still 1,000 people there waiting to say Lashana Taiva to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And Yisrael Jacobson writes that he met someone 20 years later that said, that I'll never forget, to the day I die, I'll never forget the cries that we heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe in that Rosh Hashanah. The cries that you were able to hear from wall to wall, you were able to hear the davening. And so there was Rosh Hashanah, and he said a Maimer there. He said 2 Maimarim there on the second night, and Matzi Rosh Hashanah, and the entire city came to hear the Maimarim. And Yom Kippur was there too. Yom Kippur, the Frierdiker Rebbe just stayed in the shul. For Rosh Hashanah, it's in Brownsville. They had to get a special place for him to stay in Brownsville for Rosh Hashanah. But Yom Kippur, the Frierdiker Rebbe just stayed in the shul the entire 24 hours. And Sukkot and Simchas Torah was done in Crown Heights, and they had a big sukkah there. And there was many people. There's descriptions of all the Fabrengens that the Frierdiker Rebbe does the Simchas Sheva Fabrengen, and there's Simchas Torah, the Hakafis. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes how the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his own letter that he was sitting by Atar Reisa in the big room in the home there, and everybody they were selling Atar Reisa, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said he was sitting towards the wall, which is exactly like by the Rebbe Simchas Torah. They used to sell all the psukim, and the Rebbe sat facing the wall by his place, like not being involved. So the Frierdiker writes how he's sitting facing the wall, and he decided that Hakafis is going to be just like in Lubavitch. There's going to be no differences. So, and there was the full Hakafis. The Frierdiker danced the first and the last Hakafah, and then everyone else danced in between. I think in those years, everyone used to dance for the other Hakafis in a circle. In Lubavitch also, the Rabbeim would dance in the middle by the first and seventh Hakafah. The middle Hakafis, everybody danced in a circle like regular Hakafis. But by the Rebbe, I guess it just the space didn't no longer allow it. That's probably I don't know if that's why it stopped. By the Rebbe, everyone just stood in the place and danced facing the Rebbe. But the Frierdiker Rebbe, there was Hakafis, and then there was a Fabrengen all night. The Fabrengen ended on Simchas Torah night at 7 a.m. and everybody was saying that America has never ever seen such a thing. It's unheard of. That there was Maimarim, and there was Siches, and there was Simchas Sheva, and it's really very an amazing description to see how people are coming to see a snapshot of Lubavitch, but it's like the Frierdiker Rebbe but totally not in his element. There's only a few normal chassidim there, and yet the whole it's the Bistovin with the whole hispashtos of this is how the Rebbe does things, and this is how it's going to be, and the elam is just the hispilus is unbelievable. I was wondering if there is any other visit to America that has anything daima to that. I don't just the sheer numbers of people that came out to see the Frierdiker Rebbe and the impact, and like. I've read a little bit about Jewish American history, and I haven't seen anything that even comes close. Not before, not after.
And you see when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America the second time, you see the crowd that's there to greet the Frierdiker Rebbe is also immense.
Yeah,
tremendous crowd.
It's actually much bigger than the first time, because the first time they put the Frierdiker Rebbe on a tugboat that came to a regular pier. It wasn't the official place where they received ships. So it was just like any pier. If you go walk on a boardwalk in Brooklyn or anywhere, and there's just a sidewalk along the water, that's what there was. There was nowhere to stay. There was nowhere to go inside, and it was raining. And the people came early in the morning, and the Frierdiker Rebbe showed the tugboat came by midday in the afternoon. So after 6-7 hours of rain, a lot of people had fallen away, and so you see the crowd is actually not as big as it had been earlier. But the second time, you see the crowds are immense. And it's a very, very interesting story, and it's also interesting because you read these stories, but the Rebbe's tune was in ganz Nandish. Like the Baal Shem Tov used to travel around everywhere, and the Maggid was Peishiv Kivisia. The Maggid stayed in one place, and people came to the Maggid. And you see the same thing by the Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling to all these places. The Rebbe is stays in 770, and that's it. And it's a very interesting contrast. Although there is a letter where where it seems that the Rebbe planned to visit Eretz Yisrael in Tafshin Tezvav. But that never happened in the end.
Okay, so and then so when did the Frierdiker Rebbe leave?
The end was in Chodesh Av. I don't remember the exact date. In Chodesh Av Tafish Sadik, the visit came to an end. There was a big Yud Beis Tammuz Farbrengen that hundreds and hundreds of people came. It was like the Tzeischem L'Shalom for the Frierdiker Rebbe. And then there's a video of the Malav Malka in the Kramer home. That's also at the end, right before the Frierdiker Rebbe leaves. And then there was a small Farbrengen. Yisrael Jacobson writes, he doesn't write exactly what happened. It's an interesting story where he says that all the Tmimim came for the last Shabbos. I think it was one of the Shabbosim in Tammuz or Av. And they stayed in the same hotel that the Frierdiker Rebbe was staying in, and they assumed that after davening, after Shachas in the morning, they'll get invited in for a Farbrengen. And he says, L'Poel, the Frierdiker Rebbe davened Aveda, which the Frierdiker Rebbe would sometimes daven very long on Shabbos. Sometimes, if he wanted Farbrengen, he would daven short. So, but he says the Frierdiker Rebbe davened very long, and Mincha time, they davened Mincha, and then they were called in for Farbrengen. And it was only the people that were really close. These are the Chassidim that were in Lubavitch for many years, and Timchat Mimim, and the Frierdiker Rebbe could speak openly to them. The Frierdiker Rebbe was not on show. And he says that the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke to them Dvarim Chadim Ad L'Ma'id for an hour and a half. He spoke a very, very sharp sikha. He doesn't say what, and he says that, and he writes that it was very, very difficult. He says Mipnei Abusha, like we wanted the floor to swallow us. That's what he writes, and it sounds like a sikha like Beis Kislev or something like that. Because there were moments throughout the visit of the Frierdiker Rebbe where the Frierdiker Rebbe is seeing the Chassidim in America. Chassidim in America, they're, to some extent, they're Americanizing. There was one time where Chatzef Vegan told the Frierdiker Rebbe that he doesn't know how to talk to the American Chassidim because they all wear shirts and ties. Because in Russia, the invention of shirts didn't exist. They wore like undershirts. I don't think they were full undershirts, but they didn't wear top shirts like we wear today, and especially for sure not ties. So Chatzef Vegan said, I don't know how to talk to these the American Tmimim. They all wear shirts and ties. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Oh, but the shnips is nicht mesuder. It's not, the ties are not perfectly in place. Like it's okay." So, but there were indications. I mean, that the state of even the Chassidim, the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted to hold the Chassidim to a higher standard. Maybe that's what the Sikha was about. I'm not entirely sure. Or another theory I had was that it was about Hafatz Mayanis. The Frierdiker Rebbe was pushing the entire time that the Chassidim in America needed to do Hafatz Mayanis. By Tafresh Pei Dalet, the Frierdiker Rebbe wants Shluchim in every state. Something that it took 90 years for that to happen. But the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking in terms, in very, very broad terms. And you can imagine a Chassid that came from Russia. He barely speaks English. He doesn't know the language. It obviously wasn't matching up, and that you see clearly in the letters. But anyways, I don't know what the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke about, but there was a very sharp sikha only to the very, very close Chassidim right as they were leaving. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote very, very warm letters and very beautiful letters about continuing to Hachzakas HaTorah and Hachzakas HaYadus and to raise Chassidim in America, and that in the future he'll come back to live there. It's almost directly said. It's very, very implied. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe left. It was in Tammuz.
One of the integral components of being a chassid are the Chassidisher Derher and Yom Tov. Whether it's Hey Tevis, Yud Shvat, Yud Aleph Nisan, or Gimel Tammuz. These days give us an opportunity to connect with our Rabbeim, to connect with each other, and be better chassid.
He also came, and then
what is the story
Shmuel
behind
came
each
closer
of
to
these
the war,
days?
and he got stuck here. and that's how he ended up in
How
America.
did the Rebbe commemorate
that was
and
the story.
celebrate these days?
It's really a beautiful
and most
story.
importantly, what are the lessons?
I wrote the article, and one of the editors
and
already messaged me how touched he was. And someone else told me he was really getting crying. I don't know if everyone will cry.
All of this and much more are answered in the new
it's really an amazing,
recently published by Derher.
What happened when the Frierdiker Rebbe came here?
Our Days is a journey through the Chabad calendar.
And from there, the Frierdiker Rebbe went back to Riga, then
with over 700 beautiful
in Tzadikim,
glossy
went to Poland,
pages.
Yeah,
elevated
content.
3 years later.
Beautiful
Right. There was for 2 years. The Frierdiker Rebbe traveled a lot in Europe.
Your
also,
family
he went to Latvia. There's a
and friends
will
enjoy
and
live
Yiddish, and there's a whole many trips.
That's where
this book
that's
is
where
a
the
must
Shul was.
for every Lubavitcher home,
right.
for every shul, for every school. It is a perfect gift item. This will not collect dust.
The Frierdiker Rebbe in Poland is a whole other story.
Day after day.
That's a story in itself. I guess we'll have to do a whole other article for that.
The Frierdiker Rebbe built the whole empire in
Go to derher.org /
It's really every 5 years of the Frierdiker Rebbe is another book
today
or another
start
whole
living
because
the
in Russia,
all right,
he
so
was
let's,
doing
that's very
fascinating. In Poland, it was about big Chassidic Chabad in
right
area,
along.
and in America, it was about
the
teaching
next
all of
topic
these
that I wanted to cover.
The Frierdiker Rebbe basically reinvented himself.
Also, a future article.
It was like the whole Avodah was entirely different every time he moved to a different place, and he was moving places the entire time.
Very
famous
topic
that was constant.
That the Rebbe advocated for this, that it says in the Rambam and Rashi that the Menorah is diagonal, tzalachsen, not like is in the Shar Titus in the Arch of Titus, etc., etc., etc. People, there's a lot said about it. Recently, it has been highlighted. This Tisha B'Av, the Hamevin Yavin, people know about it. We could talk about it maybe if you want. But anyways, I'm sure. Okay, so let's dive right into it, and I guess I'll ask questions if I have them.
No, that video was part of a few people reached out and said we have to make an article on the Menorah because based on whatever they were watching on Tisha B'Av, on the Yoel Gold movie, and where he has some people, or at least the claim is on the video that there's an edus of people that went down and saw the Menorah in the Vatican, and one of them says that he saw it. He says he doesn't say it clearly, but he basically says that he saw the Menorah as Balachsen. And that is in contrast in the video, in the entire video, and anywhere else in archaeology, that there's much more archaeology with a round menorah. That was the symbol that you did it. It's in Rome like that, and all over Rome, and a lot of the archaeology in Eretz Yisrael is round menorahs.
So you're saying the elephant in the room, so to speak, is that besides the Arch of Titus that has a round menorah, all over the world, in Rome and in Eretz Yisrael. Now, by the way, archaeological menorahs that have been found, some are diagonal.
Yes,
but I would say the majority are round. Majority are round. Okay, so
majority are round.
I think you have to go. I don't know. Talk about
it's a very interesting thing because the whole conversation about menorahs is really it's two different conversations happening at the same time. It's like Lubavitchers are talking in one direction and other people are talking in the other direction, and it's not a real conversation because where do you the real question is, what's your point of entry? Do we take things from Torah or do we take things from other places? What's true? Are the historians true? Is archaeology true, or is Torah true? And everything else has to match up. So when the Rebbe talks about
you're saying
Menorah,
for many years, people said that archaeologically there's no proof of the Jews in Egypt until one day, recently. Oh, by the way, we did find proof.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
The whole story of biblical archaeology is the start off was saying none of it is true, and then now slowly you have to back off because slowly you find one thing, and then you find another thing, and then you find another thing. It's not a good place to be.
As opposed to saying everything is true, and then let's time will tell, or when or if we'll find the archaeological proof as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
So for a regular person, and it's totally verstandig that a guy, he sees the Arch of Titus and it's round, and you see archaeology, it's round. So what was the Menorah? But Pashtus, it was round. The Rebbe didn't talk about archaeology at all. I don't think.
He spoke about the Arch of
Titus, exactly. In other words, the whole thing started. It was a very short piece of a sikha. There was talking about the luchas, and the luchas are supposed to be straight, and that's clear in the Gemara. And there was said, by the way,
not straight, square.
Square, right? The top is straight. And there says, by the way, The same is true about a menorah. And the Rebbe says that the Arav put out the picture of the Ksav Yad of the Rambam. Rabbi Kapach had published a Pirush HaMishnayos that he had, and he included the picture of the Ksav Yad of the Rambam. I think he was the first person to put it out with the Ksav Yad of the Rambam of the picture. And the Rebbe says that you see the Knei Menorah are straight, and in Torah, the indications in Torah are that it's straight. And yet, what are all the menorahs everywhere? They're round, and what's the most prominent one? The Sha'ar Titus. The Rebbe says it looks like we're all copying the Sha'ar Titus, and vi pastis. It's a Mashiach Tekinian also. Vi pastis that we are all copying the menorah that expresses the worst part of our galus, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, instead of doing the menorahs Hamikdash the way the Torah says, which is the menorah that's going to be with the gula. So to use the Titus menorah is a contradiction, and that it was a very short thing.
Aren't there some early sources in Torah that say that they're round also?
No, they're not direct, not clearly like that. So what there is, so then there were minus on the Sikha, and then a week later the Rebbe spoke about it again, and the Rebbe spoke about more on the Torah aspect. So you have, where in Torah do you see it's round? There's nowhere in Torah that it says clearly in round. From what I was reading on the topic, the only diuk you're able to make in the psukim.
I don't mean in Torah. There's a shainim. There's a shainim that's no.
Okay. Yeah. So there's the Even Ezra says, the Sifri says, I think it's the Sifri. He says that all the branches of the menorah were surrounding the central one. It's not clear if that means in a round it was like a candelabra, or was it a half circle. Then the Ibn Ezra says that it was round. He seems to be saying that it was in a half circle, that they came up in like a twirling way to be in like a round circle, but from the top. It's not so clear. There are some people in the Sikha there speaks about both options, that either he was saying there was a round menorah the way we talk about a round menorah, or that the top was round. That's the Ibn Ezra, and that seems to be it might be based on the Medrash, the description of the Medrash. But as far as Torah, in other words, as far as halacha is concerned, you have the psukim in Torah, and then there's the description in Mesachas Midas on how the menorah is supposed to look, and then there's the Rambam who takes from there and writes it la halacha. So the Rebbe spoke of this even more about when it was about the tzitz, that we look for what does the Torah say. And as far as the Torah says, the inyanim of the Beis Hamikdash, especially when it's halachidik, you have to look at the Rambam, because the Rambam is basically the Pesach Achron of the inyanim of Geula or these inyanim. So the Rambam says that the Rambam makes no indication that they're round, and the word kana means reed, means pipe. A kana is a straight thing. The Torah uses the word kana many, many times, and there's never any indication that it will be round. And in the psukim, the one interesting raya that I saw someone write, that he says, this is a diuk that's other yeah other nish, but it's the pasuk says kafter tachas shnei hakonim mimena ve'kafter tachas shnei hakonim mimena, that the bulb at the center of the pipes that come out of the menorah, the kafter is tachas shnei hakonim. If they go up, you can say it's tachas shnei hakonim. But if you say that the menorah is round, that means they're coming out sideways. So it's not tachas. The kafter is not tachas shnei hakonim. It's be'emtza shnei hakonim. So the word in Torah seems to imply also that it's coming from the top. But that the Rebbe never said that. The Rebbe just says that the Rambam makes a picture that it's straight. And the Rambam's son is medayik clearly, and he says that the Rambam meant to make it straight, not round. Right, because
some people want to say that the Rambam himself, this is the Rebbe in the Sikha, that the Rambam himself says he's not being medayik. So that means that the Rambam wasn't medayik. The Rebbe says no, he wasn't being medayik in the cup.
The specific, The Rambam says,
but the Rambam's son, the Avram, writes that no, my father meant medayik, that it's straight.
100%. The Rambam writes that Zuhi tzurasei b'chlolos. He writes that this is the general image, and he says he's not going to be medayik in certain things because this is only to show you.
I'm still upset at myself that when it was on display in Manhattan for a few months, and I planned on going to visit it tomorrow and the next day, and the next day, I didn't do it. So I have to wait. I think it's in Oxford, right? I have to wait to my trip to Oxford. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very so. The Rambam writes that this is tzurasei b'chlolos, and then he writes he's not being medayik, and it basically And the Rabbi Avram ben Rambam is medayik out of that picture many things that the Rambam doesn't identify specifically. In other words, the Rambam identifies that the main purpose of the picture is to show you where all the stuff go, where the cups go, where the prachim go, because that's a very complicated thing to describe in text. He's going to make a picture. But he still says Zui Tzurasi B'chlolos, like this is how it looks. And Rabbi Avram ben Rambam, he doesn't only say that it's straight, he also is medayik in another place in his Pirush that the bottom of the menorah, the base, is round, and there's no makar in Torah anywhere that the base being round, besides for the Rambam himself. That picture, the Rambam doesn't even write it in halacha; it's just rounded there. And Rabbi Avram ben Rambam writes in his Pirush on Chumash that the base was round. So. And by the way, the same thing that the idea that the Rambam had a difficulty making round branches is to some extent disqualified by the fact the base is round. There's a beautiful round base that the Rambam wrote. He clearly had the kalim that you need to draw a nice circle and a nice straight line, and he did both. So he could have made a round menorah. Essentially, the idea that the Rambam is not being medayik would mean to say like this: that we're supposed to imagine that the Rambam in his halacha says the word konim, which means straight. He draws a picture with the konim are straight, and yet in his mind, the entire time he was imagining a round menorah. That's a very, very bizarre taina to make.
And it's also Rashi writes also clearly that it's alachsin, that it's a diagonal.
Rashi writes that it's alachsin. The Rebbe spoke a little bit more about that also regarding the other Mekayres. The Rebbe based mainly on the Rambam, but Rashi says the word alachsin, and the common understanding of the word alachsin is that it's straight diagonal.
Yeah, but I saw someone trying to challenge that alachsin doesn't mean diagonal. Did you see this?
So yeah, I did see that, and so like I said, the conversation goes in two different directions, because the shaila is, where are you coming from? Is the Torah true and everything else has to match, or is archaeology true and the Torah has to match? So there's an article that goes through all the Torah tinus that the Rebbe makes and tries to twist them to fit the archaeology. So for example, this fellow says, a book called Be'er Chanir. So he says that why is the Torah using the word kana if kana means straight? He says kana is not about straight, kana is about being cholul, it's about being hollow. It's a hollow reed. The only problem is the menorah is miksha. The menorah is not hollow. It's a bit of a problem that you can't say that the word of the kana is all about being hollow when the menorah is not hollow. And he makes the same thing about alachsin. He says alachsin is not straight. It's any line that's not straight. So and he says the Mekayres that I saw so far are the Rashis in the description of the Gvul of Eretz Yisrael, where the Rashi explains how you draw the line of Eretz Yisrael around the different places, and he says that if you look there, it's not dafka b'alachsin. But if you open up any map of any chumash with a map, you open up Rashi Pshutei, it is diagonal. It's pretty much a straight diagonal. There's one description of the Yarden moving diagonally into the Kinneret. On top of the Kinneret, the Yarden continues, and it moves in a right to the right side. And there's no implication in Rashi that it doesn't mean diagonal. You could easily say it's diagonal. If you want to say that it's not, you can make that argument, but there's no indication in the text. It could be there's other Mekayres for this. I don't know. But the alachsin argument wasn't a good one, and the konim argument wasn't a good one, and it came down to the point where he says that the Rambam was a rationalist. The Rambam spoke about the fact that the Torah has to make sense in Gashmias. So he says, had the Rambam seen our archaeology, he would have for sure said that the menorah was round. That was the basic maskan of the article, and that it doesn't whatever. Obviously, coming from the Rebbe's perspective, that's not even worthy of a conversation. So in Torah, the Mekayres are all straight. So there's the Ibn Ezra says that it's round. It's not even clear what round means there. There's another one that has a whole diuk in the Avram ben Rambam to say that when he says it's straight, he's not talking about the konim, it's talking about the top. But again, that's also Rabbi Avram ben Aram is medayik so much in the picture that it's really impossible to say that it's not meduyik there. It's crazy to say that it's not meduyik. It's just a question of what are you comfortable with. If the archaeology seems to say everywhere that it's round, and there's only a miot that say that it's straight, what's takab shat? So that from so if we're writing an article on the menorah, so that whole question is really irrelevant. If we're going with Torah, the Torah says that it's straight, so it's straight. Now, you want to have some for entertainment purposes only. You want to have a discussion about the archaeology. It's fine that you can make that. You can make various arguments.
So entertain me. No.
I don't know if it qualifies as good entertainment, but there's many menorahs, first of all, that are straight, and the simple thing that you see when you go from menorah to menorah is that all the descriptions of the round menorahs, the Titus menorah is hard is not so credible because the base of it is clearly not the Torah's base, and it has Avodah Zarah there, and it was made 13 years after the march anyway. So it's hard. So by what indication are you going to say that it's true? There's one theory that the base of the menorah got broken in transit, and they made a new base, and that's why it has Avodah Zarah on it. Fine, but even the branches, and this is a problem that goes through every menorah that I've seen. I haven't seen yet, at least, a round menorah that has the diuk of the Torah on it. In other words, there's a tzir of the menorah that was found in a home of Kehanim, not far away from the Beis Hamikdash, and it's a beautiful round menorah, but there's bulbs on the entire thing from top to bottom. That's clearly not what the Torah says. So right away, you're always stuck asking, these menorahs that everyone's depicting, to what extent is that the Menorah Hamikdash? It never really looks like the Menorah Hamikdash. And this guy that made the menorah look like bulbs in the Kohen, it looks actually very similar to the Titus menorah, which also seems to have a lot of bulbs or a lot of indentations along the entire bar. So the question basically it comes down to: is there in the Beis Hamikdash? We know for sure that there was other menorahs in the Beis Hamikdash for lighting. So are they depicting those menorahs that were in the Beis Hamikdash? And the Roman architecture, the Roman style would be to make a round menorah. That would be the fancier Roman way to do it.
Where were the other menorahs in the Beis Hamikdash?
Everywhere. If they lit up the Simchas Beis Sheva at night, then they needed menorahs. They needed candelabras to hold the fires.
Who even saw
Melech had 10 menorahs in the Beis Hamikdash.
Who even saw the Menorah Hamikdash in the Kodesh? No one went into the Kodesh.
That's a very good question. So in this article, Berach Derher, he says that everyone knew what the menorah looked like. So if you're finding round menorahs, it must be based on the Beis Hamikdash menorah. And he writes a few mekoros that everyone saw the menorah. What's the makar? It says they used to bring out the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash for people to see during the Shalosh Regalim. But if you open the Gemara and Chagiga, what it actually says is that they used to bring out the shulchan so that everyone would see the nest that the challahs were still warm. It doesn't say that about the menorah. There is one place in the Yerushalmi where they say that they took the menorah to be toivelit. So there were people who saw the menorah. Kohanim saw the menorah, and you can't say that nobody saw the menorah and that the Titus menorah is unreliable because of that. Because for the simple reason that there's one of the coins that Eretz Yisrael has, one of the modern day, I think 10 agorot or something, there's a round menorah there. That's a mock-up. That's a copy of the coin that was made by one of the Chashmonai kings, Matisyahu Antignes. He coined that coin, and it has a round menorah on it. And he was a Kohen. The Chashmonaim, the whole base was the Beis Hamikdash. Half of the Chashmonaim kings were the Kohen Gedolim themselves. I don't remember if he was the Kohen Gadol, but you can't say that he didn't know what the menorah looked like, or that he wouldn't know, or people wouldn't tell him. I think that's not a fair argument. So there's a Kohen, maybe probably not a Kohen Gadol, but he's a Kohen, and he's making a coin that has a round menorah. So you're left with two options. Either because for aesthetic purposes they liked depicting round menorahs because it's nicer, because that was the Roman style, which would make sense because these Chashmonaim, the Chashmonaim weren't exactly, by that time they weren't exactly holy Jews, they were all tzdukim. So the fact that they weren't concerned with what the Torah says about a menorah it totally makes sense. So either they're depicting what's not the real menorah, or they fashioned the menorah that shalei al pi halacha, which means that the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash itself, the Beis Hamikdash was controlled by tzdukim for many, many years. There were there was all sorts of problems and fights, and tzdukim were a big force. The controlling the. So
government. You're saying it's possible that in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, they probably didn't have the real menorah.
Yeah. I mean, the Rebbe didn't make this argument. Just to be clear, I'm just saying if we're looking for explanations to say why the menorahs are round. Maybe the second Beis Hamikdash, at least after Hanukkah, because after Hanukkah there was no menorah. So they first made it with shpudim shel barzel, and that was straight. That's clearly straight. That means straight. Then when they got rich, the Gemara says they made it out of gold. Okay, who made that gold one and who designed it? It could be they made it round, and especially that the Rebbe never argues that a round menorah is pasul. There's nowhere in halacha that would indicate that a round menorah is no good. So it could be that they made a menorah. That was shaloi. That was not hiddur mitzvah. Let's say. So
what happened to the menorah from the first Beis Hamikdash?
It was probably taken into captivity. Like one day in Gemara says even the Aron was taken to Bavel. So could be the menorah was taken to Bavel too. I would imagine they took it and finished. So the menorah in the second Beis Hamikdash, it's not even the second Beis Hamikdash. It's the menorah post Chashmonaim, post Hanukkah. When they were rich enough, it's very likely that there were already big time tzdukim there. So the idea that that's a basis to say what the Torah menorah is just very weak. And to take it even further, so there are some arguments, if you just read online, that it's very difficult to make a menorah stand if it's pure gold in a diagonal menorah. and that it's just much easier if it's round. Now, I don't understand the argument, but I'm obviously way out of my depth when it comes to those things. But there are arguments to the opposite. There are people who say that's not true. But there is also the Medrash. This is just very interesting that the Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu was Niskasha B'asiyas HaMenorah until the Eibishter not only showed him, the Eibishter made it for him. There's other things that Moshe was Niskasha. What's the Chatzi Shekel? What's this? What's that? But the Niskasha B'asiyas HaMenorah, and the Eibishter made the Menorah. So if you want, I can just argue to you now that the Menorah, a straight menorah is very difficult to make, and in the second base of Mikdash they didn't succeed in making a straight menorah. But Moshe Rabbeinu, what's the menorah of Torah? What does the Eibishter want? The Eibishter wants a straight menorah. Adi Yod Nisht. And but in the movie of Yoel Gold on the Tisha B'Av video, they have a guy there that claims that he saw the menorah, and that's the menorah from the second base of Mikdash, and he says he saw Baal Achsen.
He doesn't say clearly, but that's his implication.
He indicates his implication is very, very clear. It's Ein Mishtam L'Shtei Panim that he's talking about having a straight menorah. But I mean, until video evidence comes out, you can never know if it's how true that Edus is. So yeah.
Another thing from that Tisha B'Av, I saw that was a little compelling to me archaeologically, is that he has, like, I don't know what it's called, like a mural or something. There's some archaeological artifact from then that basically on the same artifact they have two menorahs on the same one.
Yeah, one is straight
round
and
one is straight. That goes with the whole theory that maybe there's multiple menorahs, but like, why would you make on one thing two menorahs in two different shapes, one round and one? And to be clear, from the archaeological evidence that we're finding, I just saw recently one was found. There are archaeological, it's true the majority are around, but there are straight menorahs archaeologically found as well. So there are both.
Yeah, there's definitely both. On the Torah side, there's one interesting aspect that a lot of Menorahs say, that the menorah is connected the Shemesh and Yareach and the Galgalim. And that raises the question, why is it Dame the Galgalim? The 7 lamps are connected, they have the exact Lashanis I don't have in front of me. But does that mean that it's round? Some people argue if it's Dame the Galgalim are round, what does that mean? It probably means that the Kanim are round. But that's been debated also in these articles that go back and forth, and it's a big lav dafka. The Yerushalmi has one interesting thing where they say that the Prushim were being matbil the menorah in a mikvah, and the Tzdukim said, look at the Prushim, they're being toivel Galgal Shemesh. That's what they call the menorah, Galgal Shemesh, the Galgal of the sun. So it's a very interesting lashon. But all of those Menorahs don't even say that the Kanim are round. They say that the Neiris are round. It seems much more that the Neiris themselves, the top of the Menorah, were round. And I don't even know to what extent a person in those days imagined Galgalim to be round. I mean, they're standing on earth and they see up, and it goes from one side to another. I don't know if round is really the right description there. So that's another interesting thing. But in the archaeology, it is very interesting that there are amiyot that have straight, and that raises the question: why would they make the difference there? So, but the point is still that the Torah says that it's straight, so it's straight, and what will come out, it'll probably come out. You know, there's a story where I think Rabbi Ber Levin says that the Rebbe would always say that the Baal Shem Tov Siddur in the Frierdiker Rebbe's library has Hagdusha. Instead of saying Mea Psuch Hakdesh Varchava in benching, it says Hagdusha. The overflowing, or whatever the right word would be. And Ber Levin saw at some point he got his hands on the Siddur for the first time, probably after Hey Tevis, when the two libraries, the Frierdiker Rebbe's library and the Rebbe's library, were combined. So he looks in the Siddur and he sees it says Hakdesha. So he wrote to the Rebbe. He says something's wrong here. That he always heard that it says Hakdusha, and Rebbe, it says Hakdesha. And the Rebbe didn't argue with him. The Rebbe just said that we always heard from the Shver that it says Hakdusha, and that's it. So he went back and he opened the Siddur again, and then he discovered that there's 2 benchings in every Siddur, because there's a benching and then there's Haggadah Shal Pesach benching, and then Haggadah Shal Pesach benching, it says Hakdusha. The Rebbe didn't even argue with him over, is the Frierdiker Rebbe right? Was it true? Was it a mistake? Was he remembering wrong? The Rebbe said Pashtus. The Rebbe said Azoi. Now go figure it out yourself. And he went to figure it out, and he figured it out. And he discovered that it was true. So when it comes to the questions,
which is generally the Rebbe's approach, the Torah and science questions, the Rebbe is against the apologetic style of trying to take Torah and make it fit with science. The Rebbe's attitude is always, no, Torah is true. Right. Science we'll figure out later. We'll deal with it, but that's the second agenda.
Right. It's true about everything in Torah. By the Rebbe, Torah is Torah's emes. So everything has to now find a way to match up with that. If the Rashi said that Anili Basi Alel Pshuti Shal Mikra, so if you would ask me, what is it? Why is this Rashi not match Pshuti Shal Mikra? I'll say whatever. Rashi was being naita from his usual style and decided to tell us a little bit. No, it's not Pshuti Shal Mikra. But by the Rebbe, it's a davar apashut. If Rashi says Pshuti Shal Mikra, it's only Pshuti Shal Mikra, and you have to twist your brain until you're going to figure out how it makes sense. And if the Rambam says it's halachas, everything in the Rambam has to mean that it has to be an halacha. We once had an article of all the stories in Rambam that the Rebbe learned halachas out of. If you would ask me why is there a story, it would be very easy to say. Or like at the end of the halachas where the Rambam kind of goes a little more spiritual and says the ruchnis tekeinyan, or the spirituality.
I call it the Verbringens, the Rambam's Verbringens.
Exactly, Rambam's Verbringens. Someone once printed a whole book of that because, to learn the whole Mishnah Torah is boring, but you're going to, if Meister Rav Kook, so one of the Meisters, they once put out just all the ends because that's very interesting. So, but like, why does that have to mean halacha? But by the Rebbe, it's a davar pasha that each one of those is halacha, is a clear halacha. So the same thing is here. The Menorah is straight. What now? You affects Mekashas from archaeology, whatever. One day we'll figure it out, or we won't figure it out, and that's totally fine. We're not really concerned.
So that's the going kav of the article.
The article didn't happen yet, but those are my thoughts right now. Unless somebody will listen to the podcast and come with good arguments to either way to explain it, a good point to add here. But that's broadly speaking the picture.
And by the way, when it comes to the other conversation with the luchas, there's no shakavatari about it. Meaning, as far as I know, it comes to the Menorah. There might be even different opinions in Mefarshei HaTorah itself. When it comes to the luchas, I mean, it's clear. I mean, it's black and white that's square. There's no.
Right. There was once an attempt, I think Tzach in Eretz Yisrael. There was once an idea to mint a special coin in honor of Hanukkah, or to give a Hanukkah gelt from the Rebbe. There was some story about making a special coin or a special stamp, or maybe this is two stories that I'm mixing, but they wrote to the Rebbe about it, and the Rebbe wrote that if there's any possibility that you're going to make luchas that are round, then you should absolutely not do it. There's no coming to terms with that. If it's the Menorah, you should push for a straight Menorah, but around Menorah is okay, because there were days in Torah that do talk about around Menorah, and it seems like there was talking about the Ibn Ezra, which according to one version of the understanding it is talking about around Menorah or the Sifri. I'm not really sure, but the Rebbe doesn't say which day. But he says you don't have to action 9 on a Menorah if it's not possible. But the luchas, there's nothing to talk about. The luchas is it's beferish and Gemara. It's clear. There's nothing else to talk about. Yeah.
And the only reason why they're round is from, I don't know, Christian artists or some
publishers. I believe it was publishers. That it was the people who published books would make Svarim would make it, and they were copying an arch. Someone that depicted the luchas as round. So that it's totally from a Geisha Makar. There's no Makar like that. The Menorah. I mean, Yidden drew the Menorah in round very, very commonly. The Avram ben Arambam, when he writes about his father's Menorah, he says it's straight, b'yesher v'loi be'igol kameshetziru zulasei, not in round like others have depicted. And there's a big question of what others mean, because is he talking about Gdei Yisrael? Because in that case, if he's talking about the Ibn Ezra, he has Lashonos that speak very highly about the Ibn Ezra. He doesn't call him Zulasei. It's a language that he doesn't, that he might not have used on the Ibn Ezra. Or is he talking about just regular rank and file people that just make artists and talk about round? But there's no question that Yidden have been making it round, and there were Gdei Yisrael who had a round and they didn't make any machais on it. So it was well established in Jewish tradition that people had round menorahs, even if it's not Masam La'alacha or based on what the Torah says. So the Rebbe says they're not to action 9 on it. At least it's not to force other people to be miyashakav. Obviously, when a chassid makes a menorah, it's going to be straight. In the Sikha itself, in the original Sikha, the Rebbe said the Sikha on Parshas Matis Maseh, and then he continued on Dvarim. And in that, the Rebbe just says his spilus, like how strange it is that everyone does a round menorah when the big round menorah is the Sha'ar Titos, and that's a Galus Dika'inyan. But in the Likot, when it came out later in Truma Tavshim Mem Gimel, so there the Rebbe says clearly in that Likot that it's a Roy v'Nochen, that everyone should have only round menorahs. The Rebbe says it like Al Tzahira, that it's a very straight thing. The interesting thing is that the Rebbe said the Sikha Matis Masei Dvarim, which is just recently. I mean, it's Chodesh Av. In 770, in the first Sikha, the Rebbe says that the Pella is Ad Kedei Kach, that the Menorah in 770 is not Ba'alachsein. The Rebbe mentions that in the first Sikha. What do you think happened in 770 from there to Hanukkah? Nothing. The Menorah was the same Menorah. By the time when Hanukkah started, they put up the same Menorah. There were a few Bachram in 770. I think one was named Chaim Nisilevich. He lives in Yerushalayim. There was a few Bachram in 770 that were thinking about it. And after Tishrei, they were already having meetings. What are we going to do about this, about the Menorah? And finally, they came to Herschel Pekar. He was the one who fashioned it and made the gold Menorah. And Mordechai Nagel from Crown Heights paid for it. But that all happened very late. There was no one there wasn't no powers that be, no maskiris, or nobody was thinking about what the Menorah going to look like on Hanukkah. They came to him like 5 days before Hanukkah, and he worked on it for 10 days or 11 days. And by the 6th night of Hanukkah, they put up the new Menorah, and they came in from Mincha, and they said the entire Mincha there was turning around and looking at it, looking up and down, and looking at every single piece of it the entire time. They ever didn't say anything right then, but they ever looked and looked and looked. Like usually Mincha, they ever just davened straight and didn't look at anything. But this, they ever kept on turning around and looking through Achazar Sashatz to see the new Menorah.
The Menorah in 770 is the right measurements.
I mean, it's 8 konim, which means that it's not exactly put, but I think it's pretty straight. I think the cups go into each other, and that's questionable if that's what the Rambam meant.
I mean the height. Height.
I'm not sure. I never measured it, but it's something very similar. It can't be too different. It looks. It was the height of a person. The Menorah and the Beis HaMikdash was the height of a person. And there's a Sikha where the Rebbe says that you didn't even need the steps to light it. The steps are an inyan for itself. Why they had steps for the Kohen Gadol to go up. So that's the general image of the Menorah that we have.
Oh, so the Menorah in 770, I don't think it was mamish round. It was like those square Menorahs.
It was square. Yeah. It went out to sideways, but the point of not being Ba'alachsein was there. And that's what the Rebbe spoke about.
But what about the Menorahs that are like alachsin, like they go like this and then they go straight?
We're going to have to make a Shulchan Aruch on what type of Menorah you're allowed to have. Exactly, straight this way or straight that way. And a lot of the arguments are, a lot of the archaeology is stones. And the stones, there are more stones that seem to have straight Menorahs. But that's that again, it's not such a good argument because the stone is harder to carve. You can just say it's easier to carve straight. There's plenty of alachsin Menorahs that are not stone too. But yeah, it's a good question on what exactly. We'll make measurements in the Derher. Measure your Menorah this way. No, but they never said it's alachsin. That's the Indian. The Iker Nakoda is that the Indian of the Shar Titos is the worst Indian of Golos. It was made there to be mashbal the Yidden. It was made to remember the thing of Titos. And the Rebbe mentions there that whenever they wanted to be mashbal the Yidden in Rome, they would bring them to the Shar Titos. That was the source of the hashpala to say, look, we won, and the Jews and Judea kapta like they had on coins. That was the source. So as Megeitzach Mashiach Tzidkenu, it's obvious that the round Menorah has no place, and a straight Menorah is the way to go.
Okay, so we should be zeicha to the Menorah, the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the Alachsin Menorah.
Amen. This year, before my article comes out.
Okay, looking forward to both articles, and Yashakeach Gadol, and we should do this again on a different topic. Thank
you for having me. Nobody will read the magazine if we say all the secrets on the podcast.
Or maybe we're whetting their appetite, so it's a good strategy.
Right. Okay, put up a link to subscribe. Yeah.
Derher.org. Magazine.